Chapter 442. Xiao Qin glanced at him and did not say anything. She only thought in her heart, you still have to abstain from sex. Then, she went around the pile of flesh and blood and walked past it from the side. Her actions were swift and decisive, and the surrounding people were stunned by her actions. The Japanese worshipped the strong. Other than the woman who was being held, no one looked at the dead guy. Even the woman only looked at him with eyes full of hatred. Xiao Qin had already proved her ability. Logically speaking, no one would come to find trouble with her. But before they could take 2 steps, a handsome man suddenly walked over. Yan Qiue clenched his fist. As long as this person dared to provoke him, he would send him to hell. He would not let Xiao Qin have the chance to use her whip. Xiao Qin's whip only needed to be aimed at him alone. Then, the man came closer and knelt down. He looked at Xiao Qin with a fanatical expression. "Beautiful queen, please accept me as your humble servant. I am willing to use my body and soul to serve you." Yan Qiue was furious. Damn! Snatching his wife. How shameless! How shameless! He immediately stepped forward and stood in front of Xiao Qin. He said coldly, "Snatching other people's masters is not a good habit." That person glanced at Yan Qiue with disdain and said, "The fact that the master didn't complain that you didn't serve him well is already a great reward. You actually want to make decisions on behalf of the master and refuse the requests of other slave masters. You really don't know the rules." Yan Qiue wanted to kick him to death. Then, Xiao Qin grabbed his wrist and pulled him into her arms. She hugged him tightly. "Be good. You know I only want you." Then, Dai immediately came over. Xiao Qin went from hugging a man to hugging women. She was a winner in life. The man who was kneeling there was disappointed. But he was not willing to give up. He started to promote himself. "Master, are you really not going to consider me? My skills are very good, I can take a beating, and I'm very obedient. I don't need it." Xiao Qin walked away expressionlessly. Along the way, she actually met at least 10 people who came to recommend themselves. They all had that kind of inclination. He probably saw that she was good with the whip and felt that her skills in that area were not bad. There were ordinary people, superpowered people, and even a girl. Yan Qiue was so angry that she jumped up and scolded him as a pervert. She had completely forgotten that she was also a masochist. He was scolding her as well. Xiao Qin couldn't stop laughing. She kissed him and then kissed Dumbo. Then she said, "It's not like you don't know that I only have the 2 of you in my heart. Why are you angry? I hate the way they look at you. I hate that they want to snatch you away." Yan Qiue acted coquettishly and then gritted his teeth. If it wasn't for the fact that he was in a foreign land and couldn't be too arrogant, he would have directly dug out the eyeballs of that group of people. How dare they look at his wife so unscrupulously? They were courting death. Xiao Qin could only comfort him. As she comforted him, she found someone who was similar to a real estate agent and rented a house to live in. As soon as they entered the house, Yan Qiue came over and asked for a kiss. He even pulled Xiao Qin's hand into his clothes and said pitifully, "You haven't touched me for so long. Aren't we boyfriend and girlfriend now? Ah Qin, wife, let's have fun once." Then Xiao Qin sternly rejected him. If Dai was not beside her, she might have accepted him half-heartedly. But there was another Dai beside her. Chapter 443. With Dai's personality, he would definitely interfere when the time came. Although she was used to having 2 lovers, she wasn't used to having sex with 2 men. Even if Dai didn't participate and just watched from the side, she wouldn't be able to take it. Therefore, she rejected Yan Qiue with a serious expression and then said in the tone of an old Chinese doctor, "Your body is too weak. You need to abstain. Let's talk about it again in a few months." In a few months. In a few months. In a few months. Yan Qiue felt that he was going crazy. It wasn't easy for him to get his wife, but he could only watch and not touch her all day. Every time he was aroused, he could only be intimate with his left and right hands. Every time, she would follow his left and right hands in slow motion, and the right and left hands would replay in slow motion. This action gave him pleasure. If this went on, he felt that he would get a mental illness sooner or later. How could he still be intimate with his left and right hands when he already had a wife? Yan Qiue felt wrong just thinking about it. But no matter how wronged he felt, he could only endure it because his wife was the most important thing in the world. Alright, let's change the topic. What we need to do now is to clean the room. Xiao Qing found a broom for Yan Qiue and then instructed him, I'll leave the important task of sweeping the floor to you. Yan Qiue, who was holding the broom in his hand and looking confused, was speechless. Let's go, Dai. Let's clean the bedroom. Xiao Qing pulled Dai and really went to clean the bedroom. This house had 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms, with a master bedroom and 2 side bedrooms. When the time came, she could bring Yan Qiue and Dai to sleep in the master bedroom in the middle, and let Feng Lan, Ito Jimiko, and Muko sleep in the side bedrooms on the left and right. She had to throw away all the bed sheets and blankets in the bedroom. If it wasn't for the fact that the space was too small, she really wanted to bring a bed in and replace it with a new one after putting so many things in. After cleaning the room once, Xiao Qing packed up all the things on the bed and threw them out of the door. She stuffed them directly into the trash can. Then, she changed all the bedding and pillows that she brought with her in all the rooms. After cleaning up the bedroom, Xiao Qing led her 2 friends to clean up the kitchen, the living room, and every corner of the house was thoroughly cleaned. Then, Xiao Qing went to cook. Feng Lan and the others wouldn't be back until tomorrow morning, so only the 3 of them had dinner tonight. Originally, Xiao Qing thought that since they had arrived at a new place, they could go out for a walk after dinner and learn about the local customs and people. However, she didn't want to go out at all. She was afraid that if she saw something, she would want to kill someone. If she couldn't control herself, she might slaughter the entire base. How bad would that be? She was clearly a gentle person. However, no matter how gentle a person was, she couldn't stand it anymore. This wasn't a survival base, it was hell. Those people were worse than animals. It was too late to send them back to the furnace to be rebuilt, so it was better to just die. With the thoughts of, I really want to clean up this base, and I might as well just blow up Japan, Xiao Qing cooked a lot of cola chicken wings and braised rabbit head. Dinner was still cooked rice. Then, while eating chicken wings and rabbit heads, Xiao Qing temporarily dismissed the idea of directly destroying this base or sinking Japan. After all, not everyone in a country was a bad person. Even if it was such a rotten nation, there would always be some good people. It wasn't worth it to kill a group of good people for a group of bad people. Although, she still wanted to blow up Japan. After eating and drinking, it was time to sleep. They still had to pick up Feng Lan, Makiko Ito, and Feng Lan tomorrow morning. If it was a base in China, they could totally let them come back by themselves. However, they didn't dare to do so in Japan. Firstly, these 2 people didn't know where they lived. Secondly, the base in Japan was too chaotic. They were afraid that something would happen to Feng Lan, Makiko Ito, and Feng Lan. The fresh quilt still had the smell of sunshine. It was very comfortable to nestle in it. Xiao Qing slept in the middle. The 2 men, one on the left and one on the right, each hugged an arm and prepared to sleep. Yan Qiue obviously still remembered that Xiao Qing wanted him to abstain from sex. He teased Xiao Qing the whole night. In the end, Xiao Qing directly pressed his head down and stuffed him under the quilt. Sleep well. If you continue to be a demon, a certain evildoer winked at her. Just slap me to death. Then, he was tied up by Xiao Qing into a large cocoon and stuffed into a corner. Yan Qiue, who failed to seduce Feng Lan, was speechless. Chapter 444. The next morning, they went to pick up Foam Lawn and Makiko Ito. Nothing happened on the way. After all, Xiao Qing had shown her strength yesterday. Unless they were confident that they could defeat Xiao Qing, no one dared to cause trouble. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that they did not want to live anymore. After picking up the two people, Xiao Qing asked Makiko Ito, "How can I get a pass?" "It's the end of the world. You just need to prove your strength, register, and express your willingness to join the base. Then you can get a pass." Makiko Ito quickly said, "There are a total of 61 survivor bases in Japan. This pass can be used everywhere. It will be more convenient no matter where you go." Xiao Qing nodded and led them to the registration place. She really didn't want to stay here any longer. She just wanted to get the pass as soon as possible, go to Mount Fuji, find what she wanted, and leave this damn place. She did not want to stay in a perverted place like Japan for a minute longer. She wanted to go as far as she could. The registration place was in the central hall of the base. She would pass by the central square. Xiao Qing wanted to take a detour, because there would be a lot of things she did not want to see. But if she took a detour, she would have to walk more. Maybe she would meet more things, so Xiao Qing went straight. When she passed by the square, Xiao Qing found that many people were around the square. She did not know what they were doing. She looked closer and found that there was a competition in the middle of the square. Makiko Ito said, "This is the case. There will be a competition here from time to time. The bets are the slaves. People who want to compete will first take out 1 or 2 slaves and pawn them. Then the competition will be held. The winner can take away the slaves of the loser." "Can they kill people?" Xiao Qing asked curiously. Makiko Ito quickly said, "In Japan, the strong are respected. If someone is killed in the process of a fight, the officials will not care, unless the person killed has a background." After hearing her explanation, Xiao Qing understood and asked excitedly, "Can I join?" She didn't want slaves. She just wanted to kill people. No, she wanted to kill animals. Over the past day and night, she had accumulated too much anger. She had exploded a little before, but it had not been completely released. Now, looking at the square, almost every paranormal had a slave with them, and those slaves were all injured. According to Ito Kumiko, these injured slaves were more favored, and many of them were killed or disabled. Once a slave was crippled, it would be better for them to die. At least it would be easier for them to die. They wouldn't have to drag their crippled bodies around and beg for death. None of the people who came to participate in this kind of competition were good people. It would not be excessive to kill them all. You have to get a pass before you can participate. Makiko Ito said awkwardly. Xiao Qing nodded and took her friends to get a pass. When getting a pass, she encountered a problem. It was very easy for her to prove her strength, but what about Foam Lawn? He was an ordinary person, so he certainly couldn't get a pass. According to Makiko Ito, those who didn't have a pass were illegal residents. It was inconvenient to go anywhere. Killing an illegal resident could be exchanged for rewards. Needless to say, Makiko Ito was already Xiao Qing's slave when she registered. Foam Lawn tugged at Xiao Qing's sleeve and whispered, "I'm just a slave in name. I don't mind." Chapter 445. Yan Chiyue was even more straightforward. She said to the person in charge of registration happily, "I'm an accessory of my queen." The person in charge of registration was dumbfounded. He had never seen someone so happy as a slave before. This person must be crazy. In the end, all 4 of them were registered under Xiao Qing's name. From this, it could be seen how low the status of slaves was. In the registration book, slaves didn't exist as human beings, but as the possession of paranormals. They had the same status as livestock, food, and so on. After getting the pass, Xiao Qin was a little happy. Can I participate in the competition? Makiko Ito nodded, and a group of people went directly. In the center of the square, there was a registration. Only after registration could they participate in the competition. During the registration, at least one slave must be given to the organizer as collateral. During the registration, before Xiao Qin said anything, Makiko Ito walked out consciously. She knew that Feng Lan was Xiao Qin's friend, and Er Dai and Yen Chiue were Xiao Qin's lovers. Xiao Qin would never give the three of them as collateral. So, instead of waiting to be collateral, it was better for her to take the initiative to win Xiao Qin's favor. Xiao Qin patted her on the shoulder and said seriously, "Don't worry, I won't lose." Then she asked the person in charge of registration, "Are there any rules?" The person in charge of registration said, "There are no rules. As long as you like other people's slaves, you can challenge them. Do you see those slaves standing next to them? The tag hanging around their necks represents their master. You can challenge whichever slave you fancy." "That's right," said Tang Wulin. "Can I only challenge one person at a time?" Xiao Qin continued to ask. The man glanced at Xiao Qin curiously, then said, "There's no limit to that. As long as you like, you can challenge all the superpowered people here. It won't be a problem." "That's good." Xiao Qin's smile was very gentle, but the person in charge of registration couldn't help but shiver. He pulled his coat and muttered, "Is it too thin? It's not cold today." Xiao Qin glanced around, then immediately pointed to the boy with the most injuries and said, "I want to challenge his master." Not far away, a man who was sitting and resting stood up. He was very strong, with a fierce face. When he stood up, he took off his shirt, revealing his muscles and dense chest hair. He looked at Xiao Qin with a ferocious expression. "How come it's a girl? I'm a little embarrassed to do it." As he said this, he moved his wrists and smiled viciously. Xiao Qin stepped forward and said impatiently, "Can we start now?" "Of course." Before his voice died away, the man had already activated his power and rushed over. He was a strength paranormal, so he didn't take Xiao Qin's small body seriously at all. However, just as he rushed over and punched Xiao Qin, his fist was stopped by Xiao Qin's finger before he could laugh complacently. Xiao Qin's eyes were full of disdain. She deliberately said arrogantly, "What's the hurry? I'll put on a pair of gloves first, or my hands will get dirty." Then, she took out a pair of transparent gloves and began to put them on. She was too arrogant. The man was so angry that he didn't care that she was wearing gloves and punched her again. Xiao Qin suddenly disappeared and reappeared behind him. Then, she slowly continued to put on the other glove. Chapter 446. That person punched Xiao Qin 3 or 4 times, but none of his punches even touched the corner of Xiao Qin's clothes. Xiao Qin stretched her 10 fingers and then said with a smile, "It's my turn." Then, just as the man was about to punch, she grabbed his wrist and kneed him in the stomach. The man thought his body was as hard as a steel plate, but Xiao Qin's knee was like a drill. It forced him to bend over and he almost vomited. Xiao Qin was disgusted. She pressed the back of the man's head and kicked him hard on the back. Her movements were very fast. Before the man could fall to the ground, she kicked him from the bottom up and sent him flying. For the next 3 minutes, the man did not land on the ground and was beaten up in the air by her for 3 minutes. When Xiao Qin finally stopped, there was not a single bone left on the man's body except for his head. She stepped on the back of the man's head and slowly pushed it into the ground. Then, she said lazily, "Someone, come and drag this dirty thing away." The onlookers were shocked. Japanese women were generally docile. After the apocalypse, the proportion of paranormals was much less than that of men. So, men were the dominant ones. They had never seen such a violent and cruel woman. It was simply subverting their concept of traditional women. As if she was gambling in a casino, Xiao Qing stuffed the slave she had one behind her. Then she pointed to another slave whose injuries were slightly lighter than the one behind her and said, "I've also taken a fancy to this one. Let's continue." Another man who looked very short and wretched stood up. He smiled obscenely and said, "If I win, I don't want your slave. How about sleeping with me for a few days?" "Sleep your ass. Come on." Xiao Qing beckoned with her finger. The man smiled. He wasn't the blockhead from before. From the fight between Xiao Qing and the blockhead, it could be seen that Xiao Qing was also a strength-type paranormal. He was the sharpest and fastest wind-type paranormal. He had no problem playing with such a strength-type paranormal. Then, when the fight began, he was beaten up by Xiao Qing before he could use his power. Xiao Qing participated in this fight purely to vent her anger. So, she didn't want to kill her opponent in an instant. Instead, she poured her energy into her opponent's body to imprison his power. Then, she just beat him up with her fists and feet. She had a sense of propriety. She could guarantee that her opponent was still alive before she stopped. She did not kill them. She only crippled them. Death was not scary. What was scary was living a life worse than death. In a place like Japan, where the strong reigned supreme, becoming a cripple or even worse than a cripple was more ruthless than killing them. Especially these people who had been high for a long time. Once they fell to hell, it would be more painful. This was the best punishment for them. After crippling two paranormal in a row, those who came to watch the show and those who came to participate in the fight all looked at her in a different light. No one looked down on Xiao Qing anymore. After all, she was able to kill two high-level paranormal in a row, which already showed her strength. After stuffing the slave as a trophy to the back again, Xiao Qing pointed at another slave. "I want to challenge his master." This time, even the person in charge of registration couldn't help but ask, "Don't you need to take a break?" Xiao Qing shook her head. Again. After half an hour, there were already 10 slaves behind Xiao Qing. In other words, she defeated 10 paranormal in a row without any rest. Those people looked at her from the eyes that there was a good show to watch, to the woman's strength was not bad, to God, where did this lunatic come from? She was so strong that she couldn't let go of them. When it came to the 11th person, that person said in a very straightforward manner, "I'll give you the slave. I admit defeat." Xiao Qing frowned with dissatisfaction. "This is against the rules." "No rules. This slave is yours." That person left the slave without saying anything and ran away. What a joke. His strength was worse than the weakest paranormal in the previous 10. He didn't want to die. In the end, no one dared to accept the challenge. Boring. Xiao Qing took off her gloves. Yan Qiue immediately came forward with a tissue and carefully wiped her fingers. Then, she leaned over and gave her a kiss of love. "My wife is so awesome." Dai didn't show any weakness. She leaned over and kissed Xiao Qing's other cheek. "Then let's call it a day," Xiao Qing said regretfully. In fact, she hadn't beaten enough, and the anger in her heart hadn't been completely vented. Unfortunately, this group of people had been scared out of their wits by her. Xiao Qing sneered and turned around. The noble and cold expression on her face turned into the word embarrassed. The problem was, what about this group of slaves? Chapter 447. Xiao Qing was expressionless as she looked at the men and women behind her. There were old and young people in this group, but there was one thing that was very similar, and that was that they were all very good-looking. Among them, the young man who was the most injured was the most delicate and pretty. The corners of his eyes were raised, and there was a hint of charm to them. But, she couldn't care less. So many people. Fighting for a moment was fun, but after that, it would be a crematorium. The ancients did not lie to me. These people were used to being slaves and knew how to read people's expressions. When they saw Xiao Qin like this, they all knelt down and looked at Xiao Qin with tears in their eyes. Each one was more pitiful than the other. Although slaves were pitiful, abandoned slaves were even more pitiful. If Xiao Qin didn't want them anymore, they wouldn't have anywhere to go and wouldn't have the ability to guarantee their own safety. Xiao Qin was terrified. With so many pairs of eyes looking at her, she was really terrified. She hurriedly said, "You are free." The few of them immediately turned pale. When they saw Xiao Qin cripple their former master, they were both happy and afraid. They were happy that someone had avenged them, but they were afraid that Xiao Qin would do the same to them. But he didn't expect that Xiao Qin didn't want them anymore. This made all of their efforts change their expressions in an instant. The most outstanding young man said pitifully, "Master, please don't abandon me. I can do anything. I can do light and heavy work." Xiao Qin didn't know the fate of abandoning a slave. She only felt that the island people were simply too servile. Freedom was given to them, but they would rather be slaves. Isn't freedom good? The young man seemed to understand that Xiao Qin really didn't know. He hurriedly said, "We are all ordinary people, and we have been abused all year round. None of us are in good health. If we don't have master's protection, it's useless even if we get freedom. We will be bullied to death in a few days." Xiao Qin was extremely worried. She knew that even without today's incident, these people would not be able to live for long. She could tell just by looking at the injuries on their bodies. But since she had already made her move, these people were nominally hers. If she were to give them up, then it would mean that I didn't kill Boren, but Boren died because of me. It would be no different from her killing them. She could only ask Makiko Ito, "Is there a way to satisfy both sides? You can sell them to the slave house and wait for a new owner to buy them." Muko Ito hurriedly said. In the base, there was a slave exchange, also known as the Slave Management Center. Many people sold their children there and waited for others to buy them. There were also some slaves who had been sold off after being tired of playing with them. There were also many people who brought their slaves to trade with others. Although it was tantamount to leaving their lives to luck, because no one knew what kind of person would buy them, it was still better than being an abandoned slave. Xiao Qin felt that she was more humane, so she asked again, "I'll give you a choice now. If you're willing to leave, you can leave now and you'll be free. If you don't want to leave, I'll sell you to the slave detention center. Whether you live or die depends on fate. You can choose for yourself. If you're willing to leave, you can leave now." Everyone knelt on the ground, lowered their heads, and did not say a word. For a long time, no one stood up and left. After a long time, Xiao Qin said, "For those who want to leave, I can give them a crystal core. It's not much, at least enough to guarantee that they won't have to worry about food and drink for half a month." Still, no one left. "Since you all don't leave and don't say anything, then I will tacitly agree that you have chosen to be sold." Xiao Qin was actually a little disappointed. The island people were indeed too servile. They would rather go with the flow than fight. Chapter 448. After that, she took these people and let Muko Ito lead the way to the Slave Management Center. The Slave Management Center was actually a general name, which was the comprehensive name of the Slave Management Center and the Slave Trading Center. The Slave Trading Center was in front of the Slave Management Center. After passing through the small market, they could reach the Slave Management Center. Xiao Qin opened her eyes again. There were parents who took their children out to sell. Those children were older than 10 years old, and the younger ones were only 4 or 5 years old. She really didn't know how they could bear to do that. Do people buy these very young children? Xiao Qin pointed to a 4 or 5-year-old boy and asked. Before Muko Ito could ask, the little boy who was injured the most before whispered, "Yes, they buy slaves, not necessarily to use, they may also buy them for food." The boy's eyes were full of sadness. He lowered his head and no longer looked around. Then he said, "Some paranormals like to eat people, especially children. Their meat is fresh and tender. I heard that there is a very important person in the base who especially likes to eat children. That is, children who are less than 6 years old are drunk and steamed directly. It is said that this way, not only the meat is tender, but also has the fragrance of wine." Xiao Qing's footsteps paused slightly. She couldn't help but feel disgusted. She felt that she had underestimated the Japanese people. There was no most disgusting, only more disgusting. They could do such a thing. Even dogs wouldn't eat their conscience. This place was really challenging her patience. She felt that she might explode at any time and destroy this strange place. Xiao Qing, who was angry, didn't notice that the boy had been secretly looking at her with the corner of his eyes. Xiao Qing, who was disgusted, couldn't help but speed up. She didn't want to look at both sides at all. She was afraid that she couldn't help but slap the parents who sold their children to death, and then slap the people who bought the slaves to death. Were these people all animals? The children they gave birth to, a piece of meat that fell from their own body, only 4 or 5 years old, were sold to others to eat. How could they bear to do that? Xiao Qing held back her anger all the way to the door of the slave management office. She was afraid that if she was angry, she would fight with the management group. So, she asked Muko Ito to negotiate with the other party. Of course, Xiao Qing was also listening from the side. While listening, Xiao Qing discovered that those slaves were really cheap. The price of selling them was even less than a bag of rice. Those with outstanding looks might be slightly more expensive. Those with slightly inferior looks might not even be worth the price of 2 vegetables. Human lives were truly more worthless than anything else. When the slaves walked in one by one, the youth who had spoken earlier suddenly knelt down and hugged Xiao Qing's leg. "Master, master, please let me stay. I will serve master well. I will do whatever master asks me to do. Get up." Xiao Qing originally wanted to kick him, but in the end, the youth was the most seriously injured. Now, his face was pale and he was sick. If she kicked him, he might be kicked to death. The youth hugged Xiao Qing's leg tightly. He seemed to be betting that Xiao Qing wouldn't kick him away directly, so he hugged Xiao Qing's leg tightly. Xiao Qing looked around and saw that the people around them were looking at them. This wasn't a problem. So, she expressionlessly dragged the pendant on her leg and left. After leaving, she found a quiet place and tore the youth down. She threw him aside. "What do you want?" "I just want to stay by master's side. I don't want to be sold." The youth's eyes were misty and he looked very pitiful. "If I meet a bad-tempered master, with my current body, I'm afraid I can't even withstand a beating." Chapter 449. Xiao Qing sneered, "Then you are not afraid of me?" "Master is a good person, I can see it." The young boy approached cautiously and then knelt down at Xiao Qing's feet. "I am very good and obedient. I will do whatever the director wants me to do. I just want to stay with master." Yan Qiue sneered and kicked him away. She hugged Xiao Qing. "Go away." The young boy quickly said, "I will not have any improper thoughts. I just want master to give me a place to stay." Xiao Qing thought about it. She was going to leave here soon. It was okay to keep the young boy for a few days. She said, "Forget it, just think of it as hiring a part-time worker." So when they came out, there were 5 people, and when they went back, there were 6 people. The young boy's name was Mochizuki Baishui. Generally speaking, he was more tactful. After he was taken back, he was very obedient. He only did some cleaning in the yard and housework. He did not deliberately get close to Xiao Qing. Of course, this was also related to Yan Qiue's close watch. The injuries on his body were not light. Xiao Qing did not want him to die like this, so she gave some medicine to Ito Jumiko and asked her to apply some medicine on Mochizuki Baishuei when she was free. The relationship between the two began to improve. Ito Jumiko treated Mochizuki Baishuei as a younger brother. Xiao Qin got the pass and was ready to leave. The reason why she did not leave immediately these 2 days was that the medicine that Dai usually took was gone. Yan Chiue made it on the spot, so she stayed for 2 more days. These 2 days, she went out every day and found a group of people to beat up. This way, she would be in a better mood when she came back. After all, the atmosphere was too oppressive. She saw too many things that made people feel angry. If she did not vent, it would accumulate for a long time and not be good for her body. It could be said that she made use of those people. When she left, many people cheered behind her back. This fiend had finally left. During this period of time, the number of people fighting in the square had decreased by more than 2/3. As for the remaining 1/3, once they saw Xiao Qin coming over, half of them would immediately run away, even abandoning the slaves they had pawned. Xiao Qin walked out of the city gate with her little friends, found the direction to Mount Fuji, and chose a path. After walking for a few minutes, she helplessly turned around and looked at Moongazer Whitewater behind her. I already told you that there is still a month left in the apartment I rented. You can stay there. I also left food for you. Why did you follow me? The full moon Whitewater didn't say anything. It just looked at her with its big watery eyes, as if it wanted to say something. Xiao Qin said coldly, if you insist on following me, then so be it. If you encounter any danger, I won't save you. Mochizuki Baishuei still did not speak. Then he really followed her for a whole day. When it was time to set up camp in the afternoon, Moongazer Whitewater was watching from a distance. It hugged its knees pitifully and sat in the grass. It took out a dry and hard biscuit from its small cloth bag and ate it. At night, he slept in the grass. Xiao Qin tossed and turned at night. She was angry at Mochizuki Baishuei's stubbornness, and she was angry at herself for being too soft-hearted. She gritted her teeth and decided to ignore him. As a result, when she got up the next morning, Mochizuki Baishuei was covered in dew. Unsurprisingly, he was sick. His face was red. He obviously had a fever. His vision was a little blurry, but he still stubbornly followed Xiao Qin. Not to mention Makiko Ito, even Feng Lan could not bear to see him like this. When Mochizuki Baishuei could not hold on and fell down several times and got up again, Xiao Qin sighed and said to Makiko Ito, go and carry him here. He was only 17 or 18 years old. For Xiao Qin, he was still a child. She really could not bear to see him die of exhaustion. But Xiao Qin could not see that when Makiko Ito carried Mochizuki Baishuei, the corners of his mouth curled up. From the very beginning, Mochizuki Baishuei knew the ending would be like this. Because he saw very clearly that Xiao Qin was actually a person who could be persuaded by reason but not cowed by force. She looked very cold, but in fact, she was very soft-hearted. So, she would definitely let him stay. On the other side, Yan Chiue's eyes were dark. He also saw clearly that Mochizuki Baishuei was very similar to him in many ways. A mountain could not accommodate 2 tigers, not to mention this one had bad intentions. Yan Chiue did not object to anything, because he would never oppose Xiao Qin's decision, but he was secretly vigilant. Chapter 450. There was a saying, as long as the pickaxe was swung well, there was no corner that could not be dug down. No matter how confident he was in Xiao Qin, he still had to guard against those men with bad intentions. Especially people like Mochizuki Baishuei, whose skin was thicker than a city wall, and could be directly shameless at critical moments. They were exactly the same as him. He had to guard against them. Therefore, Mochizuki Baishuei, who used the trick of injuring himself, successfully joined Xiao Qin's small team. When he woke up from his coma, he saw Xiao Qin sitting by his bed, reading a book. You're awake. Xiao Qing closed the book and said in a very light tone, you want to follow me? First, don't ask what you shouldn't ask, and don't do what you shouldn't do. Just be obedient. Second, when it's time for me to leave, I'll leave immediately. Let's part on good terms, and don't fall out with each other. Third, if you have something to say, say it. Don't keep it in your heart and turn it into a conspiracy. You think I'm soft-hearted, but maybe you haven't seen my hard-hearted side. Mochizuki Baishue's high fever had just subsided, and his body was still soft like noodles. He climbed up from the bed and wanted to approach Xiao Qing, but was silently pushed back by Xiao Qing. Master, I will never do anything bad to you. Mochizuki Baishue blinked his beautiful eyes and said, Master, don't worry, I understand. Xiao Qing nodded with an unfathomable expression, then said, take care of your body. We still have to continue on our journey tomorrow. If you drag us down, I will still mercilessly throw you away. Mochizuki Baishue heard this and quickly got into bed, indicating that he was very obedient and would take good care of his body. Xiao Qing went out. She was still boiling soup. When she was ladling soup for Yan Chiue and Dai, Xiao Qing ordered Muko Ito to ladle a bowl for Mochizuki Baishue. Under Yan Chiue's resentful gaze, Muko Ito left with the soup. When Moongazer Whitewater received the soup, his eyes were full of smiles. Moongazer Whitewater said that he had a hard heart, but in his eyes, he was a soft mess. He had never seen such a soft-hearted and powerful woman. Because of Moongazer Whitewater, they had stayed for an extra day. Otherwise, with Moongazer Whitewater's body, he would never have been able to keep up with their speed. Because of that, Yan Chiue was very unhappy. When Xiao Qing was reading, Yan Chiue lay in bed and stared at Xiao Qing's back with melancholy and resentment. Staring at Xiao Qing, she turned around helplessly. What? You've been staring at me the whole afternoon. Yan Chiue was wrapped in the blanket and crawled over like a great green insect. Then, she hugged Xiao Qing's small waist and said, Ah Qing, that moon-gazing Whitewater is not simple. I know. Xiao Qing leaned back lazily and just happened to lie in Yan Chiue's arms. Then she said, he has many little tricks up his sleeves. I can see them very clearly, but I don't know what his goal is. The road ahead is long and boring, so I don't mind playing with him. You're bored with me? Yan Chiue was just massaging Xiao Qing's shoulders at first, but soon, his fingers started to mess around. His 2 fingers were very nimble, especially when he was unbuttoning. Xiao Qing hooked Yan Chiue's chin and kissed his soft and warm lips. Then, she held his hand and coaxed him like she was coaxing a child. Stop fooling around. You can't be greedy for a moment of pleasure and ruin your body. Yan Chiue was already holding it in. He dragged Xiao Qing onto the bed and said, Ah Qing, I can't take it anymore. I miss you so much. Just this once is okay. Chapter 451. Then, Dai came in. Without saying a word, he rushed over like a small cannonball and threw Yan Chiue away. Then, he hugged Xiao Qing and declared his sovereignty. Yan Chiue, who was hanging by the bed, was speechless. Xiao Qing laughed uncontrollably. She leaned on Dai's shoulder and rubbed her stomach that was hurting from laughing. Then, she said, when you recover, I promise to feed you until you're full. After resting for a day, Moongazer Whitewater was much better. At least, he could keep up with their footsteps. Xiao Qing led them away. Japan was not a big place, but it was not small either. If they walked, it would take at least a month to reach the vicinity of Mount Fuji. Fortunately, Dai's condition was very stable now. Xiao Qing was not in a hurry. She led them slowly. Most of the time, they were camping. They would not enter the base if they could. They would only enter the base when they had to replenish some things. Xiao Qing had seen too many things along the way. In the beginning, she would be so angry that she wanted to kill all those people. Now, she had calmed down a lot. There was only one idea that was slowly lingering in her heart, brewing. It was just a thought. Because she knew that one person's strength could not change such a big country. Even if it could be changed, it would take many years of effort. She was not a saint who would spend decades of effort to change a country. There were many friends at home, and her son was waiting for her to go back. She would be crazy to stay here and shine for Japan. Pfft. Actually, just thinking about the war that caused the people of China to suffer many years ago, Xiao Qing felt that this country purely deserved it. This should be retribution, right? Thinking about it, she suddenly felt that it did not matter anymore. However, when she saw it, she still felt annoyed. After all, even if this country had done wrong, not everyone was wrong. Xiao Qing felt that she shouldn't think so much because she didn't have the strength to do so. Thinking too much would be bad for herself. On the fourth day, they announced that they had run out of vegetables and fruits. They had to find a place to replenish their supplies. However, there was no base nearby. As the sky was gradually darkening, they could only find a place to set up camp temporarily and wait for tomorrow to find a base. Muko Ito was sitting at the entrance of the tent, drawing a map. She was an ordinary person, and she was very delicate. However, she was very powerful. Her memory was particularly good, and it could be said that she had a photographic memory. She was currently drawing a map of Japan. Mochizuki Baishue was sitting beside her. He couldn't hide the horror in his eyes. If he were to look for a paper map of Japan, he would find that Ito Jimiko's drawing was exactly the same. If we walk straight from here, in 2 days, we will arrive at the wind. Since the outbreak of the apocalypse, the emperor has evacuated the original capital and built a new imperial palace. Master, do you want to take a detour? Muko Ito asked while drawing. Xiao Qing was holding a military knife and cutting wood. She was going to cut some wooden skewers to barbecue the meat later. Xiao Qing raised her head and asked curiously, "Why do we need to take a detour?" "There is no need to take a detour." She really wanted to see what the boss of Japan looked like. How could he leave his country in such a mess and not do anything about it? If he was ugly, she would just kill him. Muko Ito nodded and said, "There is a base closer to us. According to our speed, we should be able to reach by noon tomorrow." "Okay." Xiao Qing handed the wooden skewers to Air Dai. Air Dai stacked the skewers to the side. After stacking the skewers, Yan Chiue had already dragged the prey back. It was a goat with horns bigger than its head. The moon-gazing Whitewater followed obediently. Together with Yan Chiue, they dragged the prey to a nearby stream. They cut open its stomach and cleaned it up. After distancing himself from Xiao Qing, Yan Chiue didn't give Full Moon of Whitewater any face. He held a knife and cut open the goat's chest as he said, "I don't care what you're planning. Stay away from Ah Qing, understand?" Moongazer Whitewater smiled innocently and said, "Why would I harm Master? I love her." Yan Chiue was not jealous or angry. He just looked at Moongazer Whitewater and said, "You may think that she is soft-hearted and easy to fool, but you don't know that the most foolish person is you. Ah Qing is indeed a soft-hearted person, but she is not a soft-hearted person. She can see through people's feelings, but she can see through people." Yan Chiue wanted to see Moongazer Whitewater talk to Xiao Qing about his love. Xiao Qing would definitely kick him dozens of miles away, right? Moongazer Whitewater just smiled. He did not care about Yan Chiue's words. He thought that he was very good at reading people. He had seen through Xiao Qing. He also saw through people in the world. To put it bluntly, she was just a woman with strength. She was very soft-hearted. Otherwise, she would not have brought him along. She was beautiful. Look at her sleeping in the same room with Air Dai and Yan Chiue every day. She was also quite beautiful. That was all. Yan Qiue did not correct Moongazer Whitewater's thoughts. No matter what he did, he would not succeed. In this regard, Yan Qiue was very confident in Xiaoqing. He even wanted to see the expression on Moongazer Whitewater's face when he failed. It would be very interesting. Although Moongazer Whitewater did not love Xiaoqing, he had that kind of intention towards Xiaoqing. Even if he was a love rival, he had to be firm, accurate, and ruthless when dealing with a love rival. He would not give him a second chance to make a comeback. No matter what Moongazer Whitewater was hiding, it had nothing to do with them. Moongazer Whitewater, who did not know what Yan Qiue was thinking, was full of confidence. He was even thinking about what to do next after subduing Xiaoqing. What he was going to do next required enough manpower and strength. Perhaps he could go to his uncle. With Xiaoqing's protection, even if his uncle fell out with him, he would be able to escape unscathed. However, this was after all a last resort. It would be best if they could reach an agreement. With his uncle's reputation and the manpower he had, it would be much easier for him to take back everything that belonged to him. While Moongazer Whitewater was thinking, he was kicked into the stream by the narrow-minded Yan Qiue. What are you doing instead of working? Moongazer Whitewater. Chapter 452. After dinner and a good night's sleep, they went to the base. This time, they entered the base purely for supplies, so Xiaoqing decided to make a quick decision. She went straight to the market and left as soon as she could, because something else would happen if she delayed too long. This had become her life's rule. But she still couldn't avoid it and rushed into the market. Xiaoqing, who had just bought a bunch of vegetables and fruits, was about to leave, was hugged by someone. Yes, she was hugged. Her thighs. The poor girl was skinny and looked underage. Her clothes were torn and couldn't cover her body. 5 or 6 men of different heights rushed over and cursed, "If I knew, I would have broken her legs. She can run so fast. No matter how fast she can run, we still caught her. I'll go first and then cut off her thighs. She can run so fast, the meat on her thighs must be chewy. I'll slice it and dip it in vinegar. Let's catch her first. Don't let the duck in our hand fly away." The little girl was running around in the crowd. No one helped her. Some deliberately stretched out their legs to trip her. The rest of the people were watching the show. The girl accidentally tripped and fell far away. She rolled under Xiaoqing's feet and hit Xiaoqing's leg. She fell hard and couldn't get up for a long time. Her trembling body looked desperate. Xiaoqing didn't understand. It was just the end of the world. Why did it become like this? Before the end of the world, although there were many strange things in this country, it was really nothing like what she was seeing. What was wrapped under the human skin was not a human's heart, but a rotten and smelly beast that was worse than zombies. Zombies ate humans because they were irrational and driven by their instincts. What about these people? She knew that she couldn't control them. Even if she could control 1 or 2 people, she couldn't control this big country. She could only say that people in this country had a bad life. She hoped that they would be reincarnated in a good place in the next life. But when such a thing happened in front of her, she couldn't just ignore it. Even if she couldn't control the entire country, she had to at least be able to live up to her conscience. Yan Qiue knew Xiaoqing's character better than anyone else. In fact, she was quite soft-hearted. Otherwise, she wouldn't have captured his heart with her silent gentleness when they first met. Therefore, Yan Qiue took a step forward and was prepared to attack. Those people walked over triumphantly and reached out to grab the thighs of the girl on the ground. "I told you to run, why don't you run again? Let me see if you can run one more step." Then, his hand was stepped on by Xiaoqing. "What are you?" He looked up, but before he could finish his words, Xiaoqing's foot hooked his chin. With a teeth-numbing crack, the man's head was directly turned back. If he could survive like this, Shao Qin would let him go. In the next second, Yan Qiue and Air Dai attacked at the same time. Air Dai had just rushed out with a ferocious face when he was caught by Shao Qin and held in her arms. Then, she waved her hand and the vines drilled out. Then, there was a particularly bloody scene. Arms, legs, heads, internal organs, and bright blood flowed all over the ground. Shao Qin said coldly, "I thought their blood was black, but it's actually red." Bad review. Yan Qiue kicked a heart that was still connected to blood vessels out of the pool of blood. She smiled coldly, "Why is this heart also red?" Bad review. Chapter 453. The surrounding people were taken aback, but that was all. No one meddled in other people's business, and they dispersed as if it was a common occurrence. No one asked Shao Qin why she killed people. Killing people because of a disagreement or displeasing to the eye was too common in this era. Shao Qin patted the shoulder of the girl who was still lying on the ground, then pointed to the broken limbs on the ground and said, "You can search her body. Whatever you find is yours." The girl actually went to search her body. Shao Qin didn't care anymore. She had cared enough. She left with the girls in her arms. Mochizuki Baishui, who was at the back, finally made a decision. Since they had left the base, they naturally had to sleep in the wilderness at night. Shao Qin asked Yan Qiue to find some insect repellent plants and light them up. She smoked them in each tent to drive away the mosquitoes so that they could sleep better. At night, she found a stream and washed her feet. When she was about to go back to sleep, she opened the tent and saw that it wasn't Air Dai and Yan Qiue, but Mochizuki Baishui. He was almost naked because his loose kimono was hanging loosely on his body. At a glance, she could see that he was naked. Mochizuki Baishui was very good-looking. His delicate eyebrows were beautiful to the point of being charming, especially when he wanted to seduce someone. Shao Qin's first reaction was to kick him out. Then, Shao Qin discovered that Yan Qiue was actually hiding behind the tent to watch the show. Shao Qin raised her eyebrows. She was about to kick out, but she retracted her foot. She found a place to sit and crossed her legs. Mochizuki Baishui came over on his knees. He raised his head slightly. This angle made his delicate eyebrows look a little fragile. In particular, the unhealed scars that were exposed through his loose clothes made him look even more fragile. It also made people have a desire to rape him. However, Shao Qin did not. She was already used to being seduced by Yan Qiue. When Yan Qiue was flirty, cough cough, when she was aroused, she was even more enchanting than the full moon Whitewater. How could she fall for the full moon of Whitewater when she was used to even more demonic things? She was just watching the show. She wanted to see what full moon in Whitewater was going to do and how far he could go. Moongazer Whitewater carefully reached out and helped Shao Qin take off her shoes. As he did so, he said, "Is Master very tired? Do you need the Moongazer serpent to relieve you of your fatigue?" "Speak human language," Shao Qin said lazily. She rested her chin on her hand and wondered how long Yan Qiue could last. Then she was disgusted by the full moon Whitewater. Full moon of Whitewater stood up, unbuttoned his clothes, and looked at her with an affectionate and shy expression. He even spun around. Then he asked her, "Master, is the Moongazer beautiful?" Shao Qin, who was prepared to watch the show, mercilessly kicked him out. "Beautiful my ass, stupid sissy." Her Yan Qiue was also flirtatious, cough cough, no, it was enchanting. But no matter how coquettish Yan Qiue was, she would not be like the full moon of Whitewater, possessed by a sissy. He was simply a transvestite. For the sake of her eyes, forget it. Moongazer Whitewater, who was lying at the door in a daze, was speechless. "I guessed the beginning, but not the end." Yan Qiue leaned against the tent, laughing so hard that tears were about to come out. He quickly calmed himself down and made his expression look more serious. Then he walked out, not caring about the full moon of White Water's pitiful pride that had just been hurt. He said with a mocking expression, "Tsk, if you don't listen to your elders, you will suffer. Tell me, how should I treat someone who tries to seduce my woman?" Chapter 454. You say you're the royal family of Japan, and you say you're the future emperor, and you ask someone to help you take it back, and they help you. Do you think the whole world is your mother? Xiao Qing resisted the urge to roll her eyes and tried to make herself look friendlier. Are you done? If you're done, you can leave. Mochizuki Baishui heard this and felt wronged. Didn't he make things clear? Why was Xiao Qing chasing him away? He quickly said, I know Master is a good person, and I know Master doesn't want to see so many ordinary people suffer. I'm the same. If Master is willing to help me take back what belongs to me, I want to change the whole country. I've suffered before, and I don't want ordinary people to be treated like objects or livestock to be slaughtered. But with my current position, I'm destined to not be able to change anything. He looked at Xiao Qing with anticipation and said, Master, don't you want this country to change for the better? As long as the current emperor and prime minister are in power, nothing will change. Instead, it will get worse. Xiao Qing held a soft and warm body in her arms and said lazily, what does it have to do with me? I'm not a Japanese, and I'll leave as soon as I'm done. So you're trying to suppress me with some righteous cause. I can't wait for Japan to sink. Mochizuki Baishui was dumbfounded. He thought that after these days of observation, he had figured out Xiao Qing's temper. Why didn't everything go according to the script? He was stunned for a while before saying, if Master is willing to help me, I'm willing to ask Master to be my state teacher after I succeed. Of course, Master will always be my master. As he said this, he looked at Xiao Qing with an ambiguous and suggestive gaze. Did Xiao Qing, who was lying flat on the bed, really look like a lecherous ghost? She raised her finger and shook it. First, I'm just an ordinary person. At most, I'm a pretty strong ability user. I can't help you with such a big thing. Second, I don't care about being a state teacher, and I don't want to be your master. Put down your things and leave quickly. If you don't leave, I can send you out. Master, please reconsider. Moongazer Whitewater didn't pester her anymore. He put down the basin and went out. Yan Qiue hugged Xiao Qing and asked curiously, why? He was quite familiar with Xiao Qing. If she really had no interest at all, Xiao Qing would have flatly refused without explaining anything. Actually, I also want someone to stand up and change this country. But like I said, what is the power of one person? Speaking of which, I'm just a slightly stronger paranormal. I can't help him at all. Of course, the most important thing is that I care more about you than these trivial things. Our key now is to go to Mount Fuji and find the medicine for air dye. People should know their limits. Don't meddle in things that you can't handle. Xiao Qing stretched her body and leaned against the pillow. She whispered, if air dye is cured, and I happen to be able to help him, I won't be stingy. Yan Qiue, who had an epiphany, immediately sent her a kiss of love and said, I see. Aren't we going to pass by soon? Maybe we can go and have a look. At most, we can take it as a tour. Anyway, we have to pass by. Xiao Qing chuckled and said, actually, there's another very important reason. I don't believe his words. Who would believe him when he said that he would change the entire country for the sake of ordinary people? He's clearly a selfish person to the core. Yan Qiue particularly agreed. After all, Moongazer Whitewater was very similar to him in many aspects, such as selfishness. Of course, he cared most about Xiao Qing now. Chapter 455. Because of this, Yan Qiue was sure that Xiao Qing would not have any feelings for Mochizuki Baishui. To put it bluntly, it was like wearing two clothes of the same style. Whether it was the material, details, or other aspects, the one you were wearing was better than the one sold on the shelf. Would you take off the one you were wearing and wear the one that was worse? Normal people would not, right? Therefore, Mochizuki Baishui would never be able to hook up with Xiao Qing in this life. No way, not even a window. The next morning, Mochizuki Baishui was still calm, but he often pestered Xiao Qing. Sometimes he did it consciously, and sometimes he did it subconsciously. Then, sticking and sticking, they reached the wind boat. Before entering the beach, Mochizuki Baishui thought of many ways to hide his appearance. After all, there were still people who recognized him. As the largest survivor base in Japan, the beach was obviously more formal than other survivor bases. For example, the procedures to enter the city were more troublesome. Then, as usual, ordinary people would enter the observation room for a night. Xiao Qing and his family of 3 would enter the city normally. Mochizuki Baishui was very big, but it was only a little smaller than Kyoto. It was bigger than the survivor base in S City. Inside, it looked more formal. At least, it wasn't like the other smaller survivor bases, which were full of abusers and violent scenes. But it was not much better. How tall could a tall man be if he was pulled out from a short man? The first thing to do after entering the base was to find a place to stay. Seeing that it was getting dark, Xiao Qing was too lazy to cook, so he said, "Why don't we find a restaurant to eat first, and then find a place to stay? We can also try some of the delicious food in Japan." Okay. Yan Qiue and Dai agreed to whatever Xiao Qing said. Then they went to find a place to eat. After walking around, Xiao Qing found a high-end restaurant and walked in. There were many people sitting inside. Xiao Qing found a table and sat down. Immediately, a waiter came over. "What would you like to eat?" Xiao Qing asked, "Do you have any famous dishes here?" The waiter hurriedly said, "We have everything you want to eat. This is the menu, you can take a look." After Xiao Qing took the menu, the temperature around her body dropped. The dishes at the front were relatively normal. There were sashimi, and so on. However, on the right, there was a row of extremely expensive dishes. Just looking at it made people angry. The name of the first row of dishes was shredded pork with green pepper. It looked very normal, but there was a row of small words below it. It said that it was made from the leg meat of young boys and girls under the age of 18. It was all natural and did not contain any spices. After that, there was something called the all-living feast. It was a feast where every part of a person was cooked using various methods and served on a table. Wait, Xiao Qing felt nauseous. She suddenly felt that even if Mochizuki Whitewater was selfish, at least he did have that kind of idea. He wanted to change the country. When people and animals appeared on the same menu, Xiao Qing's first feeling was not anger or shock, but deep despair. She did not know about other countries. After the apocalypse, she left China and came to Japan. This was the real apocalypse, the end of humanity, the end of humanity. If Mochizuki Whitewater could really do what he said, Xiao Qing was willing to help him. It was not for anything else, but for her conscience that had not been completely destroyed. Chapter 456. In the end, Xiao Qing resisted the urge to flip the table and left. As she walked out, she said self-deprecatingly, "This country is too dark and scary. If I stay here any longer, I'm afraid I'll go crazy from the suppression." Yan Qiue could only comfort her, "We can leave Japan soon and go back to the Celestial Empire. If you feel depressed, before we leave, Dai and I can accompany you to vent some. Don't think the wrong way." When he said venting, he meant to kill all the people that Xiao Qing didn't like and then leave. Xiao Qing didn't say her decision immediately. She wanted to observe Mochizuki Baishui and then teach him a lesson. Then, she would consider whether to help him or not. At least at this time, Xiao Qing really wanted to help Mochizuki Baishui. She only had Mochizuki Baishui by her side. He was qualified to be the savior of Japan. She had already calculated. At worst, she would go to Mount Fuji and solve Air Dai's problem. Before she left, she would find a way to kill the Emperor of Japan and the Prime Minister. Mochizuki Baishui would clean up the mess by himself. With the help of the crystal nucleus, Xiao Qing quickly rented a house. It was a 2-story bungalow. The window on the second floor was facing a small garden. The scenery was not bad. Of course, the rent of such a house was definitely high. Also, the landlord said that the rent would be at least 1 month. Xiao Qing rented a house for a month first. Anyway, she didn't lack crystal nuclei. After they settled down, Xiao Qing cooked for Air Dai and Yan Qiue. She had no appetite. When she wanted to eat, she felt disgusted. For this reason, Yan Qiue chatted with her for a long time. He wanted to cheer her up. In the end, Xiao Qing lay on the bed and said, "Let's stay here for 2 more days. We will observe the situation before we leave. These 2 days, we can go out and hunt some zombies to replenish our crystal nuclei." After all, they had spent a lot of crystal nuclei along the way, but their friends were good at leading the way, so they rarely encountered zombies. Logically speaking, Japan was a small country with a large population, so there should be a lot of zombies. However, their luck was off the charts. Along the way, they rarely encountered zombies. Occasionally, they would encounter a few scattered zombies, but they couldn't withstand a beating. Xiao Qing tidied up the bed and fell asleep with the 2 in her arms. Life also needed to be compared. Compared to those pitiful people, her life was simply too wonderful. She hugged left and right and didn't have to worry about food and drink. The next morning, Xiao Qing brought the 3 of them back and arranged a room for them. Then she said, "You will live here for the next 2 days. Try not to go out, because my baby and I are going out to hunt zombies. If you go out, no one can guarantee your safety. Do you understand?" The 3 of them nodded obediently. When they left, Xiao Qing deliberately mentioned Moongazer Whitewater. "I know you are a smart person, but in the face of absolute force, your brain is not enough. I know you will definitely go out, but when you go out, you have to remember that no matter how smart you are just an ordinary person. Don't cause trouble." Moongazer Whitewater's eyes were very enchanting. "Master, are you worried about me? Well, go to sleep." Xiao Qing completely ignored his secret eyes. She was ready to tidy up and go out with Yan Qiue and Air Dai. It was better to go out early. After all, they didn't know where the zombies were. They had to go out first to find a place. Then they could kill zombies to fill her little treasury. Moongazer Whitewater, who was ignored, was speechless. After being beaten for a long time, Moongazer Whitewater was used to it. For example, teasing Xiao Qing with words and actions had become a habit for him. If he didn't tease her a few times every day, it wouldn't count as a day. Sometimes, Xiao Qing thought that he was also a kind of masochist. Was he a masochist? No wonder Yan Qiue said that Moongazer Whitewater was very similar to him. They were indeed very similar. Xiao Qing was also used to teasing Moongazer Whitewater. After teasing Moongazer Whitewater, she felt much better. After bullying Moongazer Whitewater, Xiao Qing packed up and told the 3 of them that she had already prepared food in the kitchen. They could eat after warming it up. She had prepared enough for 3 people. Even if she didn't come back in the afternoon, the 3 of them wouldn't starve. After everything was prepared, she went out with Yan Qiue and Air Dai. Chapter 457. There were squads of paranormals in every base, even in Japan. After asking around, Xiaoqing learned that the squads of paranormals in the base would go around the base to clean up the zombies every once in a while. Therefore, it was very difficult to see zombies around the base. However, paranormals also needed nuclei to upgrade, so they would often form squads and go to farther places to get nuclei. In Japan, there were more squads of paranormals than fixed squads. In other words, anyone who lacked nuclei could go to the square to find his teammates and form a team freely. There were many people holding signs in the square, just like in a game where they formed a team to play a dungeon. Something like, go to XX place, where most of the zombies are level 3. Now there are 6 people in the team. One more person and the team will be formed. Another one, elite squad of paranormals. Looking for would paranormals above level 3. Main healer or support would be best. Another one, team to fight level 5 zombie king. 2 more level 3 and above zombie hunting experience are needed. Distribution is fair. In short, it looked very strange. Xiaoqing didn't know this place and didn't know where to go. The best way was naturally to find a good team. Xiaoqing arrived at the square and looked around. At least, she had to find a team that was pleasing to the eye. That way, the whole team wouldn't be wiped out by her before she arrived at the destination. Then, Xiaoqing saw a team of people from the same hometown. They were really too conspicuous. Japanese people were generally shorter. For example, Mochizuki Whitewater was already 20 years old. Although his face was a little tender, he looked like a minor. Of course, his height was also like a minor. He was a head shorter than Yan Chiue, at least 20 centimeters. When these Chinese men stood in the square, they were simply cranes in a flock of chickens. Xiaoqing saw their heads from a distance. They were so conspicuous in the crowd. Then, Xiaoqing looked at their faces, heights, and temperaments. She recognized that they were all from the same hometown. His footsteps, which were originally heading in the other direction, immediately turned around. No matter what, it was more reliable to be from the same hometown. At least they looked friendly, so Xiaoqing walked over. The man in the lead was holding a sign in his hand. On it was written in Japanese, looking for wood ability users above level 3. Support is best. She was also a wood metahuman. Although she was not a support metahuman, her support abilities were definitely not inferior to a pure support level 3 wood metahuman. I'm a level 4 wood elemental arcanist. Do you want to join me? After Xiaoqing walked over, she opened her hand. Xiao Tang, who had not seen the light of day for a long time, came out from her palm. As soon as the faint fragrance drifted out, the few of them felt weak all over. Their heads felt heavy and their feet felt light. Not to mention their abilities, they couldn't even use their strength. It wasn't until Xiaoqing took Xiao Tang that they slowly recovered and looked at Xiaoqing in horror. The leader hurriedly said, "Welcome, welcome, but, do you want to bring 2 slaves with you?" He said a little awkwardly. It would be better if they brought 1 slave, but if they brought 2, they would only be a burden if they encountered danger. This was especially disadvantageous for them. Yan Chiue immediately put her arm around Xiaoqing's shoulder and said with a smile, "Both of us are level 3 metahumans. We won't be a burden to you." Only then did the leader feel relieved. He couldn't help but give Xiaoqing a thumbs up. Being able to subdue 2 level 3 metahumans was also a skill. After joining the team, Xiaoqing found out that there were Japanese in this team. Half of them were Chinese, and the other half were Japanese. Chapter 458. Some of them were international students, while others came to Japan to work. After the outbreak of the apocalypse, they could not return home by sea, so they could only stay in Japan. It was difficult for them to survive in Japan. After all, few people could adapt to such a terrible country. However, they had no choice. In order to survive, they could only force themselves to adapt. After a long time, they learned not to be surprised. Some people even liked such a system. They were like those heartless beasts, buying and selling, torturing and killing slaves. They claimed to be fighting for the glory of the country and avenging those who died in the war. Xiao Qing just wanted to spit at them. Don't talk about fighting for the glory of the country. It was a dirty word. These people were still able to stick to the bottom line. They formed a small team and often went out to hunt zombies to feed themselves. However, the place they were going to this time was more dangerous. They had no choice but to recruit some teammates. They did not expect to recruit a fellow countryman. Especially after knowing that Xiao Qing came from the sea after the apocalypse, they were all excited. They all surrounded Xiao Qing and asked her about the situation in China. Xiao Qing had to tell them slowly and told them everything she knew. These people had not returned home for a long time. The sea was so dangerous. Some people had tried to leave by sea. No one knew whether they succeeded or not. Anyway, there was no news from them. Suddenly, someone came from their hometown. They were naturally very excited. They all thought of their hometown and their relatives. Some people even had tears in their eyes. The few Japanese on the side were somewhat dissatisfied and urged them to continue. The captain wiped his tears and said, "When we have a break at noon, you must tell us more about that place." "It's been 8 years, I haven't been home for 8 years, Xiao Qing patted him on the shoulder, and the group left. There were more than 10 people in the group. In addition to Xiao Qing and the other 2 people, there was also the captain, Gao Xiang, and his 2 friends, Li Yangyang and Qingji, nicknamed Orange Juice. There were also 2 islanders, one with the surname Inoue and the other with the surname Inoue. Xiao Qing could not remember their names. Each of them brought a slave. They were both female slaves. One was a young girl and the other was more mature. Just like that, they went on their way. On the way, the youngest, Qingji, kept pestering Xiao Qing. He was a student studying abroad. When the apocalypse broke out, he was only 21 years old. He was young and had no backbone. If he had not met Gao Xiang, he would not have survived until now. Qingji kept describing his hometown to Xiao Qing. "My home is in the suburbs of a city. Although it's a rural area, the scenery is very good. I've had a dream since I was a child to buy a house in a city and then let my parents and grandparents move in. When I left, my grandparents were already old and could not send me off at the airport. They walked me from the house to the door, from the door to the village entrance, and then they kept looking at me." Qingji's eyes turned red as he spoke. He was very clear that the apocalypse was the real doomsday for the elderly. His grandparents were already so old and it was difficult for them to survive in the apocalypse. The more he knew, the more pain he felt. Xiao Qing did not want to hurt his feelings, so he did not say a word. What was she going to say? Did they say that the entire city had fallen shortly after the outbreak of the apocalypse and was now a dead city occupied by zombies? Chapter 459. The only thing she could do was to pat Qingji on the shoulder and comfort him. That was all. "I've made a fool of myself." Qingji wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes and said, "I only have one dream now, and that is to return to my country, to my hometown. No matter what, I have to go back and take a look. Even if I can't find my family anymore, I'm still young. I'll look for them for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and travel throughout the entire Celestial Empire. As long as they're still alive, I'll definitely be able to find them." "You will." Xiao Qing studied a lot of comforting words and finally said dryly. Perhaps when she went back, she could take away these people who yearned for and wanted to return to their country, if she could get a big ship out. Qingji was still a lively young man. He kept asking Xiao Qing how she came to Japan. Xiao Qing briefly told him about the journey. Including the volcanic eruption at the bottom of the sea, how they floated to the island, and how they made a ship to float to Japan. Then Qingji's reaction was, "Wow! Ah! So amazing!" Then, his eyes lit up as he looked at Xiaoqing, filled with admiration. Yan Qiue immediately felt that something was wrong and was very vigilant. The emotion of admiration could easily turn into liking, and finally into love. This person had to be guarded against. Then, the scene was like this. Qingji surrounded Xiaoqing, and there were two people on the left and right staring at Qingji covetously. The other two also wanted to know the situation in the country and pricked up their ears to listen. At the end of the line, there were two Japanese who were flirting with women. The two brothers, Inoue and Inoue, were really weirdos among weirdos, because they stopped twice before lunch break. Every time, they carried the slaves behind the tree. As for what they did, Xiaoqing expressed that pure people did not know. Each time, it was only 3 minutes, and the time to take off their pants and put on their pants was also included. Could it be that they were peeing? Xiaoqing thought innocently. In short, they were two weirdos with estrus every 3 steps and kidney deficiency every 5 steps. When it was time for lunch break, Xiaoqing was going to find some wild animals nearby and bring them back for lunch. Who knew that Inoue would push his slave out and say, "Don't bother. I'll eat her for lunch today. I'm tired of playing with her anyway." Wakabayashi said mockingly, "This slave of yours is too old. His meat definitely won't taste good. It's better to keep him." Then, he pushed out the girl in his arms. "Eat her. Her meat is tender. Keep that one and lend it to me when the time comes." Xiaoqing had seen too many injustices along the way, but she couldn't do anything most of the time. Now that she saw these two weirdos, she couldn't help but pull out her military knife. Inoue thought that Xiaoqing was here to kill the slave, so he said, "Don't destroy the integrity of her skin when you kill her. I want to peel it off and make a blanket on the sofa." The little slave on the ground curled up into a ball and kept trembling. She looked very pitiful. Xiaoqing didn't say anything else. She held the military knife and nailed Inoue to the tree behind him. "Oh my God, your skin is too thick. It's not easy to make a blanket, but it can be used to make a carpet. I can help you." She pulled out another dagger and held it without blinking. She slashed it across Jing Shang's forehead from head to crotch. She cut it very appropriately. The skin and flesh on the wound turned out, but it wasn't fatal. Xiaoqing fiddled with the dagger and said in disdain, "I thought it was a human. Only after peeling off the skin did I realize that it was an animal. It doesn't even have the right to make a carpet." Inoue was already scared out of his wits. He didn't expect Xiaoqing to suddenly make a move and nail Inoue to the tree. The military knife pierced through his shoulder blade. It would hurt him a lot, but he wouldn't die. Inoue cursed. Then, he retreated and said, "You're crazy. You're crazy. Crazy woman." Xiaoqing was expressionless. The vines had already drilled out. Inoue wanted to struggle a little. No matter what, he was a level 3 mutant. However, a level 3 mutant was just a small shrimp to Xiaoqing. She could crush him to death with 2 fingers. In less than a few seconds, Inoue was also dragged over and hung on the tree by the vines. Xiaoqing actually wanted to torture the two of them alive. But in this way, what was the difference between her and these people? Too much abuse and violence would actually have a huge impact on her, especially on her way of dealing with things. She didn't want to become a violent person. Therefore, she decisively gave the two of them a quick death. When she turned around, she saw Qingji and the others. Chapter 460. It seemed that something was exposed. Xiaoqing silently lowered her head and looked at the two corpses. Dummy and Yan Qiue had already cooperated with her to bury them. The service of torturing, killing, and burying them couldn't be better. Xiao Qing tried her best to make herself look kinder, and then said, I can't accept eating people. The two of them are stubborn, and they forced me to give up on persuading them to use force. It's just that I'm usually quite gentle. Only a fool would believe her. However, Gao Xiang and the other two did not like the two Japanese to begin with. It was just that after getting used to some things, they chose not to see or participate in some aspects. So when Xiao Qing killed people, the three of them secretly applauded and praised her. But they didn't expect Xiao Qing to be so shameless. He was lying through his teeth, and he even said it with a straight face. In the end, their lunch was wild vegetable soup with the preserved meat that Xiao Qing saved and biscuits. They didn't want to go hunting anymore. The two women were trembling with fear, fearing that they would be eaten, but they were very grateful to Xiao Qing, so they quickly helped her pack up. At first, they didn't dare to eat at the table. They only dared to watch from the side, looking very pitiful. Xiao Qing called them. Seeing that they still didn't dare to come over, she set up a small table for them. She scooped some soup and vegetables and asked them to eat at the side. With the two girls, they did all the logistics, such as washing the dishes and cleaning up the kitchen utensils. At night, they set up camp outside. When Xiao Qing took out the tent and looked for things in the space, the two girls quickly set up the tent. They were so fast that Xiao Qing was a little dumbfounded. She just finished looking for things. When she looked up, the tent was already in front of her. At night, the two girls were very obedient. They did this and that and tidied up everything very well. Maybe they were afraid of being thrown away, so it was useful to show off. The next morning, they arrived at their destination. It was a small town that had fallen into the hands of the zombies. This town used to be a bustling town with a lot of people living there. That was why the number of zombies had increased after the apocalypse. It was said that someone had seen a zombie king here. Xiao Qing just wanted to get some high-level zombie nuclei to supply air dye. So she hoped to meet a zombie king. Xiao Qing regretted it when she entered the town. She had seen scattered zombies before, but she hadn't seen many of them, so she didn't have this kind of feeling. But now, she came to a place with a lot of zombies. As soon as she saw a row of zombies, she began to feel sick. He didn't know if it was because of the radiation, but the zombies in Japan were very ugly. They were much uglier than the zombies in China. Many zombies had large bubbles on their bodies. They were transparent bubbles filled with water, as if they would burst with a poke. They could kill people with trypophobia. Moreover, the zombies here had a high degree of decay. On the surface of their skin, there were bubbles, pustules, and so on. They looked very disgusting, many times more disgusting than the zombies in China. Was this the legendary disgusting person's disgusting part? Had the zombies in this country become more disgusting than the zombies in other places? Anyway, Xiao Qing was already disgusted, and very disgusted. If she didn't come here and couldn't go back empty-handed, she would have turned around and left. Then let's start. Don't be separated. Stay close to each other. If anything happens, we can take care of each other. Gao Xiang mainly reminded Xiao Qing, who was a newcomer. After all, this town was relatively dangerous. Gao Xiang had a good impression of Xiao Qing. He didn't want anything to happen to Xiao Qing. Chapter 461. Xiao Qing nodded, and they officially stepped into the town. The zombies in Japan were not only uglier than those in China, but also more ferocious. As soon as they entered the town, they were immediately besieged. The zombies that smelled the scent of humans immediately rushed over, and they even rushed over in groups. Gao Xiang and the others had been in this team for a long time, so their tacit understanding was naturally very high. They reacted instantly, activated their abilities, and stood back to back to avoid being surrounded by zombies. Xiao Qing and the others stood beside Gao Xiang and the others. As soon as the zombies rushed over, Xiaoqing quickly took out the guangguang that she had just received. The guangguang grew out from between them, and the tree crown was lush. The branches slowly drooped down, forming the appearance of an umbrella, protecting everyone in the middle. Those who were covered by the tree crown immediately felt refreshed, and they had endless strength. At the same time, countless vines drilled out, and began to strangle the surrounding zombies. Dai was injured, so he could only be a logistics personnel, and was responsible for collecting nuclei. As soon as a zombie was killed, he quickly went forward and dug out the nuclei. He was very active on the battlefield. Gao Xiang and the others were a little dumbfounded. They had already made preparations. Seeing that the zombies were about to pounce on them, they were also ready to make a move. Then, Xiaoqing and Yan Qiyu showed them a perfect cooperation. One was responsible for trapping the zombies, and the other was responsible for killing them. They were so fast that they were dazzled. Not a single zombie was able to get close to the guangguang's protective circle. They came out to kill zombies, not to be bystanders. However, they didn't need to do anything at all. Xiaoqing and Yan Qiyu had already killed the zombies. They didn't even need to clean the battlefield, because Dai was like the wind. So, they were actually just leading the way, right? However, the three people who were responsible for leading the way hesitated for a while. The first wave of zombies had already been completely wiped out, and Dai came back with a pile of nuclei. Xiaoqing counted and gave half of it to Gao Xiang and the others. Gao Xiang waved his hand and said, "You guys worked hard to get it. You don't have to share it with us." Xiaoqing was also very honest. "Before we set off, we made it very clear that the loot this time, no matter how many there are, will all be distributed according to the number of people. Could it be that when you get the crystal cores in the future, you don't intend to share them with us?" "No." Gao Xiang was preparing to explain, but Xiaoqing had already stuffed the crystal core over. "That's right. Let's continue to move forward." Therefore, for the next 3 hours, Gao Xiang and the others felt like they had just hit the biggest bottle of soy sauce in the world. Throughout the whole process, other than following Xiaoqing's footsteps, they did nothing else. To be precise, they couldn't do anything. Because as soon as they encountered zombies, Xiaoqing and Yan Qiyu would take the initiative to attack first. They didn't even have a chance to attack before the zombies were cleared. Almost the whole time, they didn't do anything. Even when they encountered a few level 4 zombies, they didn't have a chance to attack. The situation at that time was like this. When the zombies jumped out, Li Yangyang exclaimed, "Level 4 zombies. Everyone, be careful." Before he could shout, the overwhelming vines had already flown out and trapped the zombies easily. As soon as Yan Qiyu raised her hand, several level 4 zombies were turned into meat patties. Dai leisurely stepped forward and dug out the nuclei. Li Yangyang, mouth he suddenly didn't believe what Xiaoqing had told him. She was only at level 4. How was that possible? A level 4 superpowered person could kill level 4 zombies within seconds. And more than one. Chapter 462. Xiaoqing was at least a level 5 zombie. At least. The three of them were worried at first, but in the end, they could only stay confused from the beginning to the end. They couldn't do anything at all. Therefore, when they returned to the outside of the town, Xiaoqing wanted to share the nuclei with them, they refused. They didn't do anything, but they still wanted to share half of the nuclei. Were they even human? Xiaoqing thought that since they had agreed, they had to do it. Gao Xiang and the others felt that they didn't do anything, so they refused to take anything. In the end, both sides took a step back, and Gao Xiang and the others took a small part, which was probably equivalent to the guide fee. In Xiaoqing's words, "Without you leading the way, we couldn't find the place, let alone hunting zombies, so you must take some." Gao Xiang and the others immediately had a feeling that they had officially changed from a team of paranormals to tour guides. They got the nuclei, so they should go back. The harvest this time was not much for Gao Xiang and the others, but it was not little either. After all, they didn't take any risks, but they got a lot of nuclei, which was already a big profit. These crystal nuclei were enough for them to use for a long time. Gao Xiang and the others felt very grateful for this, so Xiaoqin conveniently stuffed the two girls to them, saying, "My two are jealous easily. Don't talk about girls, as long as it's someone close to me, they won't be willing. So, you guys take these two people back and think about how to settle them." She happily threw this burden to Gao Xiang and the others. Then they went back. Don't forget, before she left, she made enough food for 2 meals. It was already the second day, so Xiaoqin was still a little worried. The speed of going back was faster than when they came. Xiaoqin took her friends and ran all the way. After arriving at the survival base, they temporarily separated from Gao Xiang and the others. As soon as Xiaoqin went back, she found that she thought too much. The 2 dogs at home lived quite well. After all, she left a lot of vegetables and fruits, as well as nuclei. Regardless of whether he cooked it himself or went out to buy it, it was enough. She can't starve the 2 at home. After getting the crystal nucleus and buying a lot of things, Xiaoqin prepares to take people to Mount Fuji. Air Dai's injury was like a ticking time bomb. No one knew when it would explode, so it was better to deal with it first. Other things could wait until Air Dai's injury was healed. Moreover, after going to Mount Fuji and finding the things, it would take some time to figure out how to treat it. It would take a long time for Air Dai's injury to be completely healed. This period of time was enough for Xiaoqin to do many things. Xiaoqin saw a lot when she was at the survivor base. Japan was already in such a mess. What about other places? It would definitely be messier. Xiaoqin didn't feel that she was the savior of the world. She was just one person, and she had the necessary ability. She really should do something if it was within her ability. After all, the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. This responsibility wasn't forced. It was completely voluntary. If you don't want to do it, no one will force you. You just need to ask your conscience. Before leaving, Xiaoqin talked with Mochizuki Baishui alone. This time, Mochizuki Baishui didn't make any mess. He talked a lot with Xiaoqin very seriously. Xiaoqin only expressed 2 ideas from the beginning to the end. First, she also felt that Japan was too chaotic, and indeed needed to change the ruler. However, she was just an ordinary paranormal, so she couldn't help Mochizuki Baishui much. Chapter 463. Secondly, she always had something urgent to do, so she hoped that Moongazer Whitewater would not rely on her too much. Full Moon of White told Xiaoqin a lot of things in a serious manner. He told her about his plan, his backup plan, and what he would do to change the country if he succeeded. It had to be said that his description had moved Xiaoqin. If he could really do what he said, then she would be willing to help him. In the past, Xiaoqin did not believe in things like merit and retribution. After all, she had killed a lot of people. No matter whether they were bad or not, they were still human lives, so it should be harmful to merit. But after having children and Air Dai, Xiaoqin began to believe in things that she did not believe in before. She considered it as accumulating some karma for her family and friends. When they left, Moongazer Whitewater did not leave. Xiaoqin had rented the house for a month, so she let him live there. Then she took her friends to Mount Fuji. When they went back, Moongazer Whitewater should have contacted his people. After passing through the survivor base, they were not far from Mount Fuji. When they arrived at the foot of Mount Fuji, it was the season of cherry blossoms. There were cherry blossoms everywhere, which looked very beautiful and romantic. Because she was worried about Air Dai, Xiaoqin did not have the mood to see the cherry blossoms. She took her friends and ran all the way to the top of the mountain. Mount Fuji was an active volcano, but it had not erupted for many years. In addition to volcanic ash, there was dried magma on the top of the mountain. At the top of the mountain was a magma pool, but there were only dry stones left in the magma pool. Xiao Qing looked around, but did not see any green plants. She was a little anxious. Where is the thing that air dye needs? Yan Qiue also frowned. Normally, there should be some special plants at the mouth of a volcano. Even if the plants have mutated after doomsday, it is impossible for all of them to grow legs and run away. He lifted his foot and kicked a stone aside. Then, he directly jumped into the dried magma pool. The last eruption of Mount Fuji was many years ago. The magma here had already dried up for 8 generations. Yan Qiue looked around but didn't see anything green. She couldn't help but feel a little discouraged. Could it be that you can only find it in the crater of a volcano that has just erupted? This request was very difficult. Volcanoes that had just erupted were very rare. Even if they saw one, they didn't dare to go up and look for it. At that time, the magma was still active. Perhaps, the volcano would erupt for the second time when they went over to take a look. At that time, they would lose their lives. Xiao Qing was even more desperate. It could be said that they had spent a lot of effort to find such an active volcano, but it was useless. They didn't even see a bit of green. Could it be that he really had to find a way to go somewhere else and look for an active volcano that had just erupted? It doesn't have to be a volcano that has just erupted. As long as it is not a volcano that has been dormant for many years, it will be fine. Yan Qiue was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he didn't want to talk about this with Xiao Qing. He had seen Xiao Qing's efforts. They had found the place, but they didn't find what they needed. He was really unwilling to leave like this. However, there was no other way. Air Dai was still waiting for them to find the plants they needed to solve the strange force in the wound. Yan Qiue lifted his foot and was ready to leave. However, he stepped on a stone. The stone rolled down and coincidentally smashed a piece of volcanic ash that had almost evolved into a fossil. A touch of light green was exposed. Yan Qiue put his foot down. He quickly pulled out a dagger and picked up a thick piece of volcanic ash. The green, moss-like plant underneath was exposed. Yan Qiue's eyes lit up at once. There were plants here. After he told Xiao Qing about this discovery, the group of people squatted down and started knocking on the shell made of volcanic ash. They knocked all the way to the center of the magma pool. Xiao Qing realized that the sound was wrong. It was as if there was a vacuum under the layer of volcanic ash. She asked Yan Qiue and the others to step back. Then, she used the military knife in her hand to test the waters. After breaking through a layer of volcanic ash, she didn't feel any resistance. There was really a vacuum underneath. She was delighted. Then, she used force to pry open an opening. As soon as she pried it open, Xiao Qing was stunned. Through the opening, she realized that there was a volcanic crater under the magma pool. This place should be the center of the volcanic eruption. Later, the thick volcanic ash and magma mixed together and blocked the exit. No one would run to the volcanic crater like them, so no one discovered it. Under the volcanic ash that was 30 to 40 centimeters thick, there was really a volcanic crater. There was even a touch of red. It was probably flowing magma. In this way, they were simply courting death by standing on this fragile volcanic ash layer. Maybe when the volcanic ash under their feet collapsed, they would fall into it. Xiao Qing quickly asked them to step back until they reached the edge of the magma pool. Then, she tied a vine around Yan Qiue's body and tied the other end around her waist. If she fell in, she wouldn't fall directly into the magma. Then, Xiao Qing kept widening the original small opening. She carefully opened a big opening little by little. Looking at the magma below, Xiao Qing felt a little lucky. They really came at the right time. If they came a few days later, they might have arrived at the time of the eruption of Mount Fuji. Then, they would have come in vain. Fortunately, Mount Fuji was in a state where it was about to erupt, but it hadn't erupted yet. It maintained a strange state of balance. After Xiaoqing opened a hole big enough for one person to go through, she stuck her head in and shone with a flashlight. The stone walls on both sides were covered with moss-like plants. Chapter 464. Logically speaking, the deeper they went, the closer they were to the magma and the higher the temperature, there shouldn't be any plants. However, Xiaoqing used the light to scan and found that the deeper they went, the more plants there were. At first it was just a layer of moss, but as they went down, it became taller weeds, and as they went further down, they could only see sporadic flowers. It was too magical. Could it be that after the apocalypse, the plants had mutated and become more adaptable? Did they start to like the high temperature? Xiaoqing didn't know, but she was sure of one thing, and that was they had to go down. Yes, they had to go down. If they didn't find any plants outside, then their last hope was inside. According to the law, the deeper they went, the more plants there were. Maybe what they were looking for was near the magma. But it was too dangerous. Below was magma, and the temperature was enough to melt people in an instant. In other words, if they accidentally fell into the magma, they wouldn't have any chance of survival. Then, who should go down? Yan Qiue stood up silently, and gently hugged Xiaoqing, and then said, "I'll go down. We don't know what kind of plants can cure air dye, but I'm an expert in this field. I can slowly find them after I go down." No. Xiaoqing refused without hesitation. She frowned, and then said, "It's too dangerous." Aching. Yan Qiue grabbed Xiaoqing's shoulder and kissed her, and then said, "Are you going to say that it's too dangerous, so you go down? Every time, you leave all of us and face the danger alone. Have you ever thought about us? I'm a man. If I let my woman take risks every time, then am I still a man? Aching, don't take everything on your shoulders. Now that we are together, you can try to trust me more and share some of the burden with me." Yan Qiue had always listened to Xiaoqing, but this time, he didn't want Xiaoqing to take risks. She had taken enough risks, and he had to bear it for once. Xiaoqing hesitated for a second and then said, "Let's go together." If she let Yan Qiue go down alone, she would definitely be worried. Since Yan Qiue refused to let her go down alone, she would compromise and let the two of them go down together. This result was already very good for Yan Qiue. Then, they began to discuss how to proceed. The best way was naturally Xiaoqing's vines. Xiaoqing looked around and found nothing suitable to make a pillar. She had to tie the end of the vine to her bare body and let Air Dai and Muko Ito guard it. The other end was tied to her and Yan Qiue's waist. The two of them went down one after the other. Xiaoqing was below. This was Xiaoqing's request. She said very clearly that if Yan Qiue insisted on going down, then she would go down alone. Yan Qiue had no choice but to listen to her. Xiaoqing stretched out her sharp nails and grabbed the wall. Then she slowly climbed down. The space below was still very wide. She had a pink lantern on her waist. In the range of the lantern's light, she could see the dense moss on the wall. Yan Qiue didn't have any nails to use, so she had to use a dagger to stab into the wall to stabilize her body. The two of them slowly climbed down. They didn't know how long they had been climbing, but they were still far from the magma. However, they could already feel the scorching temperature. At this time, there were many kinds of plants growing on the walls. Yan Qiue directed Xiaoqing to pick a lot of plants and put them into the space. They would distinguish them one by one when they went out. Chapter 465. Xiaoqing didn't feel tired, but Yan Qiue was. They had been climbing for so long that Yan Qiue was already exhausted. Xiao Qing stopped and supported Yan Qiue to let him rest for a while. When he had rested enough, they continued to climb. Time passed minute by minute. When they could see the surface of the magma lake, Yan Qiue exclaimed, "Look!" Xiao Qing lowered her head and immediately saw a flower growing on the edge of the magma lake. The flower was very beautiful. Its red petals overlapped, and the color of the petals changed from light to dark, like a blooming flame. It was so beautiful, especially when it was reflected by the dark red magma. Xiao Qing could even imagine that when the volcano erupted, the color of the magma would become bright. When the whole flower was submerged in the magma, it would definitely be even more beautiful. However, what they needed to do now was to pluck the flower. This peanut field was so close to the magma. It might be what Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue were looking for. The two immediately sped up and climbed down. The closer they got to the magma, the more careful they were. Occasionally, one or two stones would be stepped into the magma and be swallowed by the magma in an instant. Finally, Xiao Qing was the first to reach a place very close to the magma lake. Xiao Qing couldn't feel the scorching temperature. At most, she felt that her skin was a little drier than usual. However, Yan Qiue was already sweating all over. Xiao Qing's nails were stuck in the wall, and her other hand reached out to grab the flower. The flower's root was in the magma, so it looked like the whole flower was floating on the magma. In fact, a section of its stem was above the magma lake. As long as Xiao Qing pinched the stem, she could pull the whole flower out. As soon as she pinched the stem, she saw a bubble on the surface of the magma lake. Then, a red snake came out of the magma. Xiao Qing was caught off guard. Although she had always been vigilant, she had never thought that there would be living things in such high-temperature magma. Therefore, when the snake came out, it gave her a fright. Her hand trembled, and the whole flower was pulled out by her. She hurriedly stuffed the flower into her space, and then her whole body stuck to the wall. The snake that drilled out was very long and thick. It stirred the magma, and bits of magma splashed on the wall. The moment it saw that the flower was gone, the entire snake became irritable and directly pounced on Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing was in such a place with Yan Qiue above her head. She couldn't move at all and couldn't dodge at all. She could only pull out the military knife from her waist and face the snake head-on. The snake's head hit the military knife. The huge force made her hand go numb. The military knife fell and was swallowed by the magma. Xiao Qing didn't have time to mourn the knife that she had used for a long time. She was in a state of, what the fuck, because she saw that the magma had become irritable and was continuously spreading upwards. God, was the volcano going to erupt? If the volcano erupted at this time, she and Yan Qiue would definitely die here. The power of nature was irresistible. For example, when the volcano erupted at the bottom of the sea, they almost died in the sea. Xiao Qing's heart was filled with, what the fuck? She carried Yan Qiue and climbed up the wall like a nimble monkey. There was also an enraged fire snake below. It hissed and spat out its tongue, trying to attack Xiao Qing. However, it seemed like it couldn't leave the magma. After half of its body was outside the magma, it couldn't drill out anymore. It could only spit out its tongue angrily, and then slowly be swallowed by the magma. If someone could drill into the magma at this moment, they would discover that the snake's tail was in the rock. During the apocalypse, there was a small volcanic eruption that didn't even erupt out of the ground. It was at that time that the snake accidentally fell in. Chapter 466. Fortunately, after the apocalypse, animals began to mutate. It did not die in the magma, and half of its body grew together with the solidified magma. When Xiao Qing carried Yan Qiue and climbed up, Dumbo outside was also being tested. He was originally squatting on the ground and counting stones. Suddenly, the ground shook, and then countless snakes, insects, rats, and ants suddenly ran out of their nests as if they were running for their lives and ran down the mountain quickly. Some beasts were also like that. Air Dai was stunned, but Ito Jumiko reacted, "Not good. The volcano is going to erupt." She was speaking Japanese, so Air Dai did not understand it. Even if he did, he would not leave Xiaoqing alone. At this time, a mutant tiger jumped out from the side. It seemed to be one of the members who were preparing to escape because of the eruption, but it happened to bump into Air Dai. A tender girl like Ito Kurumiko was a great temptation to mutated beasts. It was tempting to come up and take a bite of her. Ito Jumiko was left behind by Xiaoqing, so Air Dai would not let Ito Jumiko be eaten. He stopped the tiger and threw Ito Jumiko under the light. With Quang Guang protecting Ito Jumiko, she was relatively safe. Air Dai was injured. Normally, he could easily beat a level 3 or 4 mutant tiger. However, he was injured, so he could not beat this mutant tiger. Air Dai was not stupid. If he could not beat the tiger, he would hide under the light. This tiger would not dare to enter the range of Quang Guang. Otherwise, with Quang Guang's help, he could beat this tiger in minutes. Then an accident happened. The tiger pounced forward and broke the vines. Dummy's face changed immediately. He didn't care about the tiger anymore. He quickly pounced forward and grabbed the broken vines. The tiger did not eat zombies. It was only interested in Ito Jumiko. Now that it could not eat Ito Jumiko and felt that the volcano was about to erupt, it ran away. As for Xiaoqing and Yan Chiue, Xiaoqing had given up climbing up step by step, because it was too slow. She grabbed the wall and ran all the way. While running, the vines suddenly loosened, and she and Yan Chiue fell down. Xiaoqing was caught off guard and almost fell into the magma. Just as she was about to come into contact with the magma and some splashes of magma had even landed on her body, she stopped. Xiaoqing immediately knew that something must have happened outside. She grabbed the wall and could not help but have a headache. Her previous efforts were in vain. She had to climb up again. Xiaoqing did not know that Air Dai was at the entrance of the cave at the moment. He grabbed the vine tightly. His clothes were torn because of the fast dragging. He grabbed the vine tightly and hooked his foot on a stone outside the cave. Then he slowly climbed back. During the climb, he had to hold on to the vine tightly. Fortunately, Xiaoqing was attached to the wall at this moment, so she would not bring any burden to Dummy. He grabbed the vines and slowly retreated. After Xiaoqing felt the force pulling her waist, she followed him and climbed up. One was pushing and the other was climbing. Below them was the magma. It was very dangerous. Air Dai grabbed the vine and returned to the Quang Guang tree. He tied the vine to the trunk and then pulled the vine to help Xiaoqing. Ito Jumiko also rushed to help. With this help, Xiaoqing climbed up a lot faster. Finally, before the magma gushed out, she climbed out of the cave. Chapter 467. After a night of rest, they decisively returned to Kamikaze to give Yan Chiue a quiet space to study the medicine. Xiaoqing still had the key in her hand. After returning to her rented room, she directly opened the door. Moongazer Whitewater was not there, but it was obvious that someone took care of the house every day. Yan Chiue carried a pile of plants and quickly went upstairs to study, leaving Xiaoqing and Air Dai sitting there in a daze. After a while, Feng Lan was the first to come back with a bag of groceries. Back then, the journey to Mount Fuji was not safe, and Feng Lan did not have the ability to protect himself, so Xiaoqing left him at the survivor base. "You're back." Feng Lan was very excited and threw the bag of vegetables. Xiaoqing nodded and said, "You bought a lot of vegetables. Why did you buy so much? You can't save it." Feng Lan quickly said, "Moongazer Whitewater said that he wanted to bring his uncle back for dinner, so I bought more vegetables. I bought them together with tomorrow's food, so we don't have to go out. Moongazer Whitewater's uncle. Xiao Qing did not think too much. She just accompanied Feng Lan to the kitchen to prepare the vegetables. When the dishes were almost done, Moongazer Whitewater finally came back. He also brought back an acquaintance of Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing heard the sound and poked her head out of the kitchen. She saw Abe Shizuki behind Moongazer Whitewater. She was stunned for a moment, then couldn't help but say, "Moongazer Whitewater, this is your uncle." Moongazer Whitewater was also surprised. He looked up at Xiao Qing a little shyly, "Master, you're back." "Yes, this is my uncle." Abe Shizuki obviously did not expect that he would meet Xiao Qing again, and in Japan. "I think this is probably fate," Abe Shizuki said self-deprecatingly. Xiao Qing shrugged and said, "It's probably an ill-fated relationship." This time, Moongazer Whitewater was curious. "They know each other?" He was stunned for a moment, then asked. "Of course we know each other." Xiao Qing made an inviting gesture and said, "No matter what, please come in first. Otherwise, people will say that we are neglecting our guests." Then they entered the house. After entering the house, Ito and Makiko immediately came forward to serve tea. Their hands were very fast. Each of them held a teacup, and the three of them sat on the sofa and chatted. "I didn't expect you to be Moongazer Whitewater's uncle." Xiao Qing sighed. The full moon of Whitewater immediately knelt in front of her and hugged Xiao Qing's leg shyly. "I didn't know that master and my uncle knew each other." Then he was kicked out by Xiao Qing. "Speak normally." After chatting for a while, Xiao Qing learned that Abe Shizuku was the brother of Mochizuki Shirasui's mother. Mochizuki Shirasui's mother was also from the Abe family, but she wasn't a onmyoji. The relationship between the brother and sister wasn't very good. Otherwise, when Mochizuki Shirasui was in trouble, Abe Shizuku wouldn't have stopped. It wasn't bad. Otherwise, Mochizuki Shirasui wouldn't have been able to invite Abe Shizuku. While chatting, it could be seen that Abe Shizuku was a little wary of Xiao Qing. The reason why he agreed to help Mochizuki Shirasui was because of his sister's friendship, and also because he couldn't bear to see Japan becoming more and more chaotic. Japan needed a leader who was bold and willing to reform. Mochizuki Shirasui might have a lot of things to change, but he was already much better than the current Showa. People were afraid of comparison. Xiao Qing and Abe Shizuku chatted and found that Abe Shizuku had a lot of subordinates. He was in charge of the entire country's onmyoji and a team of mutants. Chapter 468. In this team, there were at least dozens of level 3 paranormals, and a few level 4 paranormals. It was a very good team. At least with this strength, he could already sweep away all the paranormals in Japan. In addition, Abe Shizuku also controlled a considerable number of members, which meant that he had a strong right to speak in the parliament. The most important thing was that they didn't have military power in their hands. If their fists weren't hard enough, who would be willing to listen to you? For this reason, Mokizuki Baishuei prepared 3 plans, each of which was carefully considered by him. During lunch, Yan Chiue didn't come down to eat. It was Xiao Qing who sent it upstairs. After talking about business, it was private. Abe Shizuku couldn't help but ask Xiao Qing, "Why did you come to Japan?" Xiao Qing said with a serious face, "I came to travel, and then the ship broke down halfway, so I drifted here." Abe Shizuku didn't ask too much. After all, he knew that it was perfunctory. Xiao Qing wasn't going to tell him the real reason, so he didn't have to ask too much. But here came the problem. Yan Chiue didn't come down to eat because of the drug problem. Mokizuki Baishuei was very active, and he was seducing Xiao Qing the whole time. It was not easy for him to seize the opportunity when Yan Chiue was not here. Naturally, he would do his best to make Xiao Qing feel helpless. For example, as soon as the dishes were served, Mokuzuk Baishui knelt down and picked up this and that. After picking up the food, he put it into Xiao Qing's mouth. Xiao Qing certainly wouldn't open her mouth, and she looked at him expressionlessly. He silently retracted his chopsticks, then put the food in his mouth and said with a seductive face, "Do you want to eat like this, master?" Xiao Qing couldn't kick him out because Dai had already made a move. She said helplessly, "Can't you be normal?" With Mokuzuk Baishui causing trouble, the meal was very slow. After eating, Xiao Qing went upstairs to see if Yan Chiue was eating well. As soon as Xiao Qing left, Abe Shizuk asked Mokuzuk Baishui, "Do you like her?" Full Moon Whitewater didn't say anything. His expression said, "You can guess." But in his heart, he didn't care. He felt that he was a person with strong control, especially when it came to his heart. How could he casually fall in love with someone? How could he casually hand over his heart to someone else? This was simply impossible. At most, he liked to tease Xiao Qing and watch Xiao Qing's face. However, Abe Shizuka felt that the onlooker could see more clearly. Mokuzuk Baishui, Abe Shizuk Baishui, Shizuk Shizuk, Shizuk Shizuk. However, Abe Shizuk didn't enlighten him. Perhaps the bad taste was passed down in the family. On this point, the uncle and nephew were surprisingly in agreement. For example, Abe Shizuk was waiting to watch a show. After chatting, Abe Shizuk was about to leave. Mokuzuk Baishui also fiddled around for a while and then went to Xiao Qing's room. Xiao Qing was in the room thinking about what to do when the time came. She felt that she could bring Mikiko Ito there in advance and let her see the situation and then draw a map. With a map, they could safely evacuate when the time came. As she was thinking, someone knocked on the door. "Who is it?" "Come in, the door isn't locked." Xiao Qing answered and looked up. Then, her jaw hit the ground. The person who came in was Mokuzuk Baishui. He was only wearing a loose white shirt. The length of the shirt was limited and could only cover his thighs. It covered his balls so that he wouldn't touch them. Chapter 469. Yan Chiue crazily studied for a few days. Finally, he came out of the room with disheveled hair. "I did it." Xiao Qing didn't mind that he was dirty. She pinched his chin and gave him a kiss. Then, she quickly took the medicine and dragged Yan Chiue to Dai. There were two kinds of medicine, oral and external. Xiao Qing violently broke in and took off Dai. She fed him the medicine and applied the medicine. Their efforts were not in vain. As soon as the medicine was applied, they could see that the strange energy that affected Dai's recovery was eroded little by little. At this speed, Dai would be completely recovered in 3 days. Great! Xiao Qing hugged Yan Chiue's neck and kissed him. Then, she hugged Dai and kissed him. Then, she pushed Yan Chiue away and said with disgust, "Go take a shower." "Your hair is oily." Yan Chiue was speechless. She pulled up her pants and didn't recognize anyone. When Yan Chiue went to take a shower, Mochizuki Shiroizuki came to find Xiao Qing in disgust with her what to do. Currently, Mochizuki Shiroizuki had asked people to spread the news that the explosion at Mount Fuji was caused by the anger of the gods. The gods were dissatisfied with the royal family. What he needed to do next was to cut off the royal family's wings step by step and replace them. And he only wanted Xiao Qing to do one thing, which was to get rid of Showa's secret weapon. His secret weapon was modified people. After modification, he didn't know if they should be called zombies or superpowered people. Mochizuki Shiroizuki was lucky enough to see them once, and he still couldn't forget them. After getting rid of this secret weapon, the rest would be easy. With Abe and Shizuka holding back the big boss, it would be easy to replace the boss. He had been secretly planning for a long time. Victory or defeat depended on this one move. Xiao Qing went alone. She didn't tell Yan Qiue and the others what she was going to do. She just said that she had something to deal with and that there was no danger. Then, she left. Yan Qiue wanted to follow her, but Shao Qing rejected him on the grounds that he had to stay and observe Dai's situation and take care of them. Then, Shao Qing left alone, bringing along a person who would show her the way. After solving the problem here, she took Dai and the others back and found a time to get married. Although he had never seen a woman marry two men at the same time, she was capable and willful. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Although they were the experimental subjects, they were the experimental, the second batch, as guards, they cooperated with the researchers research. And the modified people were the zombies, with Shizuki Shai Shishiro Izuki Shitsi and, after all, they and Shizuku Kukuko. The base was not particularly confidential. At first, Showa believed in their strength and was not worried that someone would come and cause trouble. Secondly, Showa had the final say in Japan. Shizuki Sa's Shish. Therefore, this base was basically half open. However, the place where this experimental base was located was quite remote. Within a radius of dozens of miles, there was no one. Even if something happened, as long as the transmission of information was blocked in time, no one would come over for a short period of time. Therefore, as long as she didn't let this group of people spread the news, she could kill everyone and leave without anyone noticing. Chapter 470. However, the possibility of that happening was quite small. After calculating the time it would take for reinforcements to arrive, Shao Qing was relieved. If she moved faster, it would be safer. Then, Shao Qing left the person who led the way and sneaked into the base. The base had a total of 3 floors, 2 on the surface and 1 underground. She wanted to kill the entire base without causing panic and leaking the news. If reinforcements came, she could only assassinate them in the early stages. After killing most of the important people, she would deal with those who did not have intelligence or had lower intelligence. Shao Qing had a good plan. The moment she entered the base, she took out Chiu Tang and pinned it to her waist. The fragrance of Chiu Tang was very faint. Ordinary people would not notice it. It could silently lose its ability to move. It was a great help in assassination. Shao Qing first went to the second floor. The second floor was the office building. All the higher-ups of the base were on the second floor. If she wanted to eliminate future troubles, she would not only have to kill all the modified people, but also the researchers and higher-ups. She would destroy all the information so that this evil research could never be seen again. Actually, she was also worried that when Full Moon Whitewater came to power, he would restart this evil research. Therefore, it was safer to destroy the entire base. As long as the entire research base was destroyed, Full Moon Whitewater would not be able to restart this transformation project in a short period of time. Shao Qing quickly sneaked into the first office. There were people in the office. It was a bald middle-aged man and a beautiful woman. The two of them were doing something that could not be described. Shao Qing glanced at a certain part of the middle-aged man. Then, she had to admit that some rumors were quite true. For example, Japanese men were generally cough cough. She crouched on the roof beam with a dagger in her mouth. She lovingly waited for the two of them to finish before she quietly released Chiu Tang. Once Chiu Tang's scent made their entire bodies weak, Shao Qing ended their lives. She then put the pair of lovebirds back in the same position they were in before she left. This way, if someone came over, they might look at the window and feel that they should not be disturbed, so they left. She was too quick-witted. Shao Qing patrolled the second floor. Whenever someone was alone in the office or there were not many people in the office, she would immediately use the Chiu Tang, which was even more effective than the knockout incense. Then, he decisively killed them. After passing through several rooms, Xiao Qin rubbed his chin and counted the number of people he had killed. Then, he returned to the first floor. Not only were there many staff members on the first floor, there were also girls posing for selfies. As long as she killed a person, she would immediately put that person in a position that would not be easily suspected, such as lying down to sleep or talking about love. Of course, the most important thing was that after killing everyone, she had to find the stairs or elevator to the basement. The key points were all in the basement. Starting from the first floor, she also began to encounter modified people. These modified people were all very ugly. They were already quite ugly, but when they were modified, their good-looking parts were removed, so they were even uglier. For example, she had seen modified people like this. Their entire right hand was replaced by a machine, and half of their face was rotten. Modified people were not easy to deal with. The Qiu Tang was ineffective against them. If she used real guns and bullets, she would be discovered if she made too much noise. When the time came, she would be surrounded once the alarm went out. The feeling of being surrounded was not good at all. It was difficult for two fists to fight against four hands. Even a random punch could kill an old master. Therefore, at the beginning, she avoided them. When she found modified people, she would take a detour and kill the normal people first. Slowly, she realized that these modified people appeared in a pattern. These modified people seemed to be divided into small groups, patrolling around in groups. Xiao Qin was like Spider-Man. She hung on the ceiling and counted. There were 6 modified people in a group, and about 10 minutes later, there would be a group of modified people patrolling below. It was too crowded and not easy to deal with. She had to kill 6 modified people within 10 minutes, and she could not make a sound. This was simply too difficult. It was an impossible task, okay? Xiao Qin had a terrible headache. Then, accidents always came so suddenly. She was thinking about how to deal with these groups of modified people. Suddenly, in a group of modified people, the one at the end of the group stopped and looked around in confusion. Finally, he raised his head. Xiao Qin secretly exclaimed. Then, she fell from the sky like a weight, smashing down with a thud. Then, she smashed right on the head of the modified person. When she fell, the vines had already spread out and wrapped around the 6 of them at the fastest speed. When they wrapped around them, the first thing they bound was their mouths. No matter what, the most important thing was to not let them make a sound. Then, Xiao Qin quickly ended the life of the modified person at the end of the group. For safety reasons, she directly twisted the head of this modified person. As she expected, the remaining 5 people started to struggle. She did not have the ability to kill all of them in one go, so naturally, she made a sound. She could even hear the sound of footsteps coming over. After Xiao Qin finished off the 5 modified people at the fastest speed, she quickly opened the window, hung herself out of the window, and closed the window again. Soon, the sound of footsteps came closer. Someone discovered the corpse on the ground and sounded the alarm. After a while, someone came over. That person said angrily, "Someone sneaked into the base, and you only found out now. A bunch of useless people. Hurry up and check around. The rest of you, follow me and search around. You must find that person." Soon, the sound of footsteps faded away. Xiao Qin did not go back through the window. Although the most dangerous place was the safest place, she still had other things to do. Xiao Qin climbed up to the 2nd floor, found an open window, and went in. She didn't know if she was lucky or not, but the place she went in happened to be the place where she killed the first pair of adulterers. The moment she went in, she heard someone knocking on the door. She quickly hid behind the curtains and cursed her bad luck. It was bad enough that she found this house randomly, but there were still people coming over. She hid behind the curtains. If they forced the door open later, she would have no choice but to do so. Fortunately, Luck was still on her side. Xiao Qing suddenly heard a voice outside the door. Damn, they are actually doing something in broad daylight. Forget it, forget it. Go to the next room. Don't disturb them. They will make things difficult for us. Chapter 471. After successfully dodging the attack, Xiao Qing crawled out from under the table. She sighed and glanced at the man and woman lying on the table. Then, she was blinded by the fat on the man's body. She covered her face and quietly crawled out. After being discovered, she had to be more careful with her actions. Otherwise, she would be inhumanely besieged. At that time, she would not be here to wipe out this base of androids. She would be here to deliver her life. She quietly planted daughter seeds all over the corridor. As long as someone passed by, the daughter seeds would be on their body. She could not rashly let the daughter seeds enter the bodies of those people, because it would be easy for them to be discovered. The daughter seeds stayed on the surface of their bodies and did not move at all. If there was a direct confrontation, they would grow out quickly like parasitic spores and interfere with the host. At the same time, Xiao Qing did a second, more evil thing. She took out the pollen of the chiotang and soaked it in water. Then, she soaked the daughter seeds in the water as well. In other words, the daughter seeds all carried the poison of the chiotang. Although they were diluted with water, once someone was infected, they would slowly become powerless. This kind of powerlessness could not be felt during normal times, but when they were in a battle, they would realize that something was wrong. It could be said that Xiao Qing was extremely evil. After all, she was fighting a group of people alone. She had to be a little evil. After arranging everything, she began the massacre. This time, it was a head-on massacre. As long as she found a patrol team that was alone, she would immediately attack and kill them. A patrol team of no more than 10 people was no different from delivering food to her. The average strength of those androids was above level 3, but what about Xiao Qing? She was only one step away from level 6. Killing a few level 3 and level 4 androids was not a problem at all. Even if these androids could not feel pain or fatigue because their bodies had been modified, it was useless. Because she could kill them in an instant. Gradually, the people in the base of the androids realized that something was wrong. Some of the teams of androids that went out to patrol never returned. And it was not just one or two teams, but several teams of androids that had disappeared. And their numbers were increasing. The higher-ups immediately ordered the two modified teams to merge into one. Once they discovered any abnormalities, they were to report it immediately. Then, they discovered that many of the higher-ups had died in their rooms. An inexplicable panic spread throughout the base. They didn't know how many people had infiltrated the base, nor did they know what the other party's goal was. They only knew that their own people were dying. However, it was not convenient for them to request for help when they were not sure how many intruders there were. What if they requested help only to find out that there were only a few intruders? Wouldn't that be a slap in the face? It was only when nearly half of the cyborgs had mysteriously disappeared that the higher-ups finally couldn't help but send out a distress signal. As soon as she saw the distress signal, Xiao Qing immediately jumped up. She had to get rid of this group of people as soon as possible and then quickly retreat. Otherwise, she would be surrounded like a dumpling. At this point, there was no need for her to hide anymore. She directly found a combined team of androids. The moment the battle began, she released Guangguang. Guangguang grew very luxuriantly. It was as tall as a 2-story building. As soon as it was released, it quickly took root and pierced through the floor. Its tentacles even extended to the first floor. Its crown also broke through the ceiling. The dense branches extended in all directions with an indescribable arrogance. Chapter 472. Anyone who was enveloped by the light, be it a normal person or a modified human, would be slowed down and fall into an illusion. Although the slow movement and the illusion would only last for a short period of time and they would soon wake up, this short period of time was enough. The vines in Xiaoqing's hands quickly broke their necks. Those who were lucky enough to escape were also killed by Xiaoqing's knife and vines. More than a dozen cyborgs, under Xiaoqing's unreserved attacks, only lasted for less than a minute. The light was too big. Countless people rushed towards it. Xiaoqing stood under the tree, unmoving like a mountain. She was prepared to take on the entire base alone. Some people came faster and died earlier. They had just arrived in front of Xiaoqing and had not activated their abilities when small vines suddenly grew out of their bodies. The roots of the daughter quickly pierced into their flesh, carrying the poison of the autumn flowers. Then, Xiaoqing made her move. When the higher-ups of the cyborgs' base led the strongest team of cyborgs over, they only saw a tall tree, a beautiful woman standing under the tree, and corpses lying on the ground. The densely packed corpses made their scalps tingle. They had considered how many intruders there were, but they had never thought that there was only one. A woman. She stood on the spot and killed countless cyborgs. If someone had told them that someone had such an ability, they would have laughed at that person without reservation. How was that possible? How was that possible? Unless the other party was a god. But now, the truth was in front of them. Xiaoqing pretentiously lit a cigarette and held it in her mouth. She looked at the people who were rushing over with a melancholy aura. Then, she stretched out her hand. The vines clustered around her like living creatures. As soon as the battle began, they would quickly fly out to find their prey, tie them up, and pierce their skin with their thorns to inject venom into their bodies. Instead of saying that they were a bunch of vines, they were more like poisonous snakes in the plant world. The thorns were their fangs. The cyborgs that came this time were obviously stronger than the previous ones. At most, it would take Xiaoqing a little more effort to deal with them. There was nothing else. Xiaoqing commanded the little vines to kill the modified humans one after another. Her eyes were filled with pity. She really didn't know why there were people in this world who were willing to become modified humans who didn't feel any pain and didn't even have feelings. While she was struggling to find a way to turn back into a normal person, some people were willing to accept the transformation. Was strength really that important? Perhaps the ambition of those in power was more important. After killing a bunch of androids, Xiaoqing was a little dissatisfied. She took the initiative to go to the first floor. She started from the second floor and searched every room openly, trying not to leave anyone alive. After walking through the second floor, she went to the first floor. After walking through the first floor, she went underground. The underground of the base was a laboratory. There were many half-finished products lying on the operating table. Xiaoqing had to admit that it was disgusting. It was only when she arrived at the laboratory that she found out how the so-called modified humans were created. It was similar to the zombified mutants created by the demonic mercenary group. At least in principle, it was similar. They injected a very special drug into people who had been bitten but had not turned into zombies. It would allow their bodies to maintain a certain level of rationality during the process of zombification. This level of rationality was very low, equivalent to a child of a few years old. Then, another drug was used to control them. Chapter 473. Of course, it was hard to find people who had been bitten but hadn't turned into zombies. They caught ordinary people and let zombies bite them, then carried out the so-called transformation. As for the transformed people with superpowers, they were a little stronger than zombies because they were more rational. There were two kinds of transformed people with superpowers. One was to replace their limbs with machines, and the other was to transform them into zombies. The researchers in the base found that the reason why superpowered people couldn't be infected by zombies was that their cells had been mutated, and ordinary people were different. Once they were bitten or scratched by zombies, the infected cells would automatically necrotize and be expelled from the body. Therefore, superpowered people couldn't be infected. Therefore, they thought of another way, which was to let zombies infect ordinary people, then extract the infected cells from the ordinary people's bodies, and finally implant them into the bodies of superpowered people. The facts told them that this method could indeed infect superpowered people, and it would also retain some of the superpowered people's consciousness. At least, the superpowered people's fighting instincts could be preserved, as well as some judgment and cognition. The transformed superpowered people's fighting strength would be much higher than ordinary superpowered people. These were all discovered by Xiaoqing after going through the information stored in the base. While she was killing the androids, she was also searching for the research materials in the base. When the time came, she would destroy all the information. However, after getting the information, Xiaoqing changed her mind. She found that these people had taken her discovery to the wrong path. What if she changed her mind? For example, if she studied the cells of superpowered people and figured out why they were different, could she invent a drug to resist the zombie poison? Although Xiaoqing was now standing on the opposite side of human beings because of what happened before, she still hoped that such a drug could be invented. When she went back, she could give the information to old Master Qin. She hoped it would be useful. After putting all the information into her space, Xiaoqing was like a barbaric bandit. She directly turned on the mode of killing without caring about burying, killing wherever she went. Those who blocked her way. Kill those who ran away. Catch up and kill those who formed a group to kill her. Kill him. In the beginning, the higher-ups of the base were still organizing people to try and kill Xiaoqing. Later on, they only cared about hiding their heads and running away. Then, they sent the cyborgs to their deaths to buy time and wait for reinforcements. However, no one could stop Xiaoqing's footsteps, not even for a moment. The higher-ups were dumbfounded. The base chief was more decisive. He gritted his teeth and ordered his subordinates, release 17396. His subordinate was dumbfounded. But sir, number 17396 is only a half-finished product. The reason why it was said to be a semi-finished product was not because the modification had not been completed, but because it had not been implanted with something to control it. If it was released, no one knew what would happen. If it went crazy, even if the intruder was killed, they wouldn't be able to control 17396. The best result would be a lose-lose situation. Didn't you hear? I said release it. The base chief gritted his teeth. His veins were bulging. The most important thing now was to kill this intruder. After the intruder was killed, reinforcements would arrive. By then, they would definitely be able to take down number 17396. His plan was very good. The other two hurriedly agreed and hurried to the deepest part of the base. Soon, an angry roar was heard. This roar reverberated throughout the entire base. Even Xiaoqing heard it. She stopped in her tracks and pricked up her ears to listen carefully. Could it be that this group of people was going to use their ultimate move? She listened carefully for a while but didn't find anything wrong. She didn't even hear the sound of someone approaching. She continued walking forward. After walking for a while, a group of people stumbled over. The leader was a human. He should be one of the higher-ups of the base. There were also a few people who were covered in blood and looked particularly miserable. That wasn't the main point. The main point was that the thing at the back was probably once a human. The reason why she said that it was probably once a human was because it didn't look like a human at all. Its huge body was like a giant gorilla. The surface of its bulging muscles was covered with a network of green blood vessels. There were traces of stitches around its waist. Its lower body looked like some kind of ape-like beast. One of its eyes had been dug out and replaced with an electronic eyeball. Its face was also densely covered with blood vessels. It could be vaguely seen that it used to be a very handsome man. Chapter 474. It probably still had some rationality. At the very least, it could tell who was the enemy. After glancing at Xiaoqing, it pounced on the higher-ups of the base who were protected by the cyborgs. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. All the cyborgs who tried to stop it were torn apart alive. Xiaoqing even felt that she didn't need to do anything anymore. Xiaoqing took a step back. After absorbing the fresh blood, the tree became even more lush. She calmly used her vines to pull back the people who tried to escape. The cyborgs that stood out from the rest roared. Its voice was filled with gratitude. Then, it tore everyone into pieces and stepped on them. In the end, only a pile of meat was left. In the tunnel, countless daughter quietly took root and sprouted, searching for traces of the living. After confirming that no one was still alive, Xiaoqing prepared to leave. As for the cyborgs in front of her, it had nothing to do with her. Just as Xiaoqing was about to leave, the huge cyborgs suddenly collapsed. At this moment, Xiaoqing realized that its back was full of holes. It seemed that many tubes had been inserted into it. Dark red blood kept seeping out of the holes. It fell to the ground and panted. When it raised its head to look at Xiaoqing, its eyes were full of pleading. However, it had lost the ability to speak and couldn't express its pleading. Xiaoqing stopped in front of it and looked at it struggling to gesture. In the end, she nodded. After seeing Xiaoqing nod, its eyes were filled with gratitude and relief. Then, it used the last of its strength and tore its body apart. Its lower body, which was not inferior to its lower body, was torn off from the stitches. It was thrown far away. Only its upper body was left. No, it should be him. It tried its best to crawl in a direction. Xiaoqing followed behind it. Looking at the dark red bloodstains on the ground, there was an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was indeed seriously injured. However, as long as it left this place, found a place to hide, and slowly recovered, it could still live for a long, long time. However, it chose to die. It ended its own life. Xiaoqing guessed that he probably didn't want to live as such a monster. However, when Xiaoqing saw his destination, she realized that there was only one reason why he didn't want to live anymore. That was, there was no reason to live anymore. His lover was gone, and all his enemies were dead. What was the point of living? He might as well accompany his dead lover. Xiaoqing looked at the woman soaked in formalin and said softly, "Don't worry, I will bury you together." The man leaned against the glass and grinned. Xiaoqing broke the container and took out the woman's pale body. She handed it to the man. The man hugged his dead wife tightly. His eyes were full of satisfaction. If they couldn't be born together, then they would be in the same coffin. If there was a next life, he was willing to be her husband. After the men died, Xiaoqing wrapped their bodies in a quilt and quietly took them away. The reinforcements who came to support saw from afar that the entire base turned into a huge mushroom cloud and then disappeared from this world. When Zhao He heard the news, he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. The base of androids that he had spent so much effort to build was destroyed just like that. Those precious materials and researchers were also gone. This meant that if he wanted to build a second base of androids, he would have to start from scratch. It would be strange if he didn't go crazy with anger. On the other hand, Full Moon Whitewater was the opposite of him. Chapter 475. Mochizuki Whitewater's original plan was to let Xiaoqing explore first, then gather Abe Shizuyuki and his subordinates to destroy the base. But he didn't expect that Xiaoqing would give him such a big surprise. She directly destroyed the base by herself. Mochizuki Whitewater couldn't help but overturn his previous guess. Xiaoqing's strength was probably much stronger than he thought. This was an out-and-out surprise. After all, the stronger Xiaoqing was, the more help she would be to him. When Xiao Qing returned home, Dai was lying on the sofa with ointment all over his back. Xiao Qing leaned over and kissed Dai. Then, she checked him. She found that the wound on Dai's back had healed a little. It seemed that he would be fully recovered in a few days. "Why don't you go upstairs?" Xiao Qing touched Dai's head. Dai crawled forward and put his head on Xiao Qing's lap. Xiao Qing smiled and kissed the back of his head again. "I'll go take a shower first." Then, she went upstairs. When she walked to the bathroom door, she heard the sound of water and Yan Qiue's seductive breathing. Xiao Qing was a little helpless and angry. She really hoped that Yan Qiue's body could fully recover. She made him abstain for the sake of his health. But what about Yan Qiue? She stood at the door for a long time. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Then, the door opened. Yan Qiue, wearing nothing, walked out with a towel wrapped around his waist. There were shallow wounds on his body. Obviously, he had just satisfied himself. Xiao Qing felt helpless. She was worried that she would hurt Yan Qiue if she got too angry. So, she hurriedly walked around Yan Qiue and went into the bathroom. Then, Yan Qiue hugged her at the door. Yan Qiue felt wronged. He kissed Xiao Qing's earlobe and whispered, "I didn't." Xiao Qing snorted and pinched the bruises on his waist. Then, what happened? Yan Qiue hurriedly said, "I hit the edge of the bathtub. Qing, you know, although my body is mine, I'm only willing to let you touch me." Xiao Qing sighed. She hugged Yan Qiue and kissed his forehead. Then, she said, "Let's do it when we get home." That. She was talking about home in Jiangqing City. Yan Qiue's eyes lit up. He quickly nodded and said shyly, "Then, let me scrub your back now," when the two came out of the bathtubs. When they came out of the bathtub's body, a certain spaces was. And she was, she's, he's was, s, was b's get a's. Soon, she would be able to bring her friends and the two at home back to China. They had already settled down in Jiangqing City. There were many of her friends there. She didn't have to worry about her identity being exposed. She didn't have to worry about food, shelter, and transportation. She had people who loved her by her side. A beautiful life was coming. Xiao Qing couldn't wait to go back. She missed Little Bun, Pan Pan, and the others very much. Except for the military, Xiao Qing didn't interfere in other aspects. She let Moonwhite Water and Abe Shirzwa do it. Xiao Qing saw clearly that if the two of them joined hands, the country would be theirs sooner or later. The day before Moonwhite Water's huge plan was about to succeed, Xiao Qing found him and said straightforwardly, "I'm leaving. Prepare a boat for me." The smile on Moonwhite Water's face instantly froze. He only felt that the victory in front of him could no longer arouse his joy. Chapter 476. Xiao Qing was leaving. He had a premonition, but he didn't expect this day to come so quickly. He thought that at least Xiao Qing would see him succeed, see him sit in the supreme position, and then leave. At that time, he already had the ability to keep Xiao Qing. Why? Full Moon of White Water didn't understand. "I've been here for a long time, and it's already exceeded my expectations. My family is waiting for me at home, and here, you don't need my help anymore," Xiao Qing said lightly. Full Moon of White Water's face was a little pale. He was very arrogant. From the beginning, when he came to Xiao Qing's side, he was attracted to Xiao Qing. She was really a very special woman, different from all the women in Japan. He was deeply attracted to her every word, every action, and every action. At that time, Full Moon of White Water believed that he was only interested in Xiao Qing. He had never been unable to get what he wanted. Later, he gradually realized that he seemed to like Xiao Qing. He hesitated, but soon he was relieved. If he liked her, he would get her. Full Moon of White Water believed in his charm. When he lowered himself to chase a woman, no woman could reject him. But reality gave him a hard slap. Xiao Qing never cared about him, let alone liked him. Rejection after rejection made him feel lost, and at the same time, more and more unwilling. He cared more and more and liked her more and more. In the end, when Xiao Qing told him that she was leaving, Full Moon of White Water realized that he couldn't extricate himself. Why did he have to leave? He didn't mind that Xiao Qing had other people by her side, as long as she was willing to stay by his side. He was willing to give her everything, even if what Xiao Qing wanted was the supreme power. But obviously, Xiao Qing didn't care about these things. Full Moon of White Water's face became paler and paler. He suddenly walked past Xiao Qing and closed the door. With his back against the door, there was a touch of weakness on his face. Don't go. Don't go, Xiao Qing looked at Full Moon of White Water calmly. There was no emotion in her eyes. Full Moon of White Water took off his clothes, one by one, until he was naked. Whatever they can give you, I can. Whatever they can't give you, I can too. Moongazer Whitewater knelt at the feet of Xiao Qing in a devout manner and kissed Xiao Qing's instep. You're my master, and you'll be the master of this country in the future. Why don't you stay? I beg you. In the past, he had used a joking tone to tell Xiao Qing these things, but Xiao Qing knew very well that it was just a joke. But this time, his voice was trembling. His body was also trembling. His cheek was pressed tightly against her instep, transmitting this trembling from the bottom of his heart to her. Xiao Qing was very calm. When facing her lover, she could be very gentle. When facing unrelated people, her heart could be as hard as stone. She looked at Full Moon of White Water without any fluctuation in her gaze. It was as if the person kneeling before her was not a living beauty, but a pink skeleton. You don't have to be like this. Soon, the entire country will be yours. You can have any woman you want, Xiao Qing said softly. But I only want you. Full Moon of White Water hugged Xiao Qing's leg. His eyes were red and filled with stubbornness. He had always been willful since he was young, but there had never been anything that he wanted so desperately. But I don't want you. Xiao Qing stroked Full Moon of White Water's head and said, why do you have to degrade yourself? It's time for me to go. Full Moon of White Water hugged Xiao Qing's leg tightly and begged, can you stay? I can give you anything you want. Look at your heart. Do you really love me? Xiao Qing smiled. There's no need to act like this. It's just a joke. She easily pushed Full Moon of White Water away and opened the door. Just as Xiao Qing stepped out of the door, Full Moon of White Water screamed at the top of his lungs, go. If you go, I'll destroy this country. Don't you pity them? Don't you want the ordinary people to be saved? I'll destroy them. Xiao Qing's calm voice sounded. Up to you. She strode away without a trace of reluctance. Full Moon of White Water felt an indescribable despair. Why? Why couldn't she be gentler to him? Even 1% of the gentleness she showed to Dai and Yan Qiue would have been good enough. He sat on the ground, paralyzed. He did not look like someone who was about to become a supreme ruler. He looked more like a clown trying to please the crowd. He exposed his ugliest, most unbearable, and most pitiful side to that person. But that person did not even bother to look back at him. So cruel. So hateful. Full Moon of White Water covered his face and curled into a ball. He knew that he could not keep her. He could not keep her. Chapter 477. The day Xiao Qing chose to leave was also the most critical day of Mochizuki Shiranui's plan. For some reason, Mochizuki Shiranui did not come to send Xiao Qing off. Only Ito Kumiko and Abe Shizuka came. The ship was prepared by Mochizuki Shiranui. There were several sailors on it. It was big and comfortable. When Xiaoqing took her two pets and Feng Lan to the ship, Ito Kumiko knelt there and kowtowed sincerely. She was grateful. If it were not for Xiaoqing, she might have died at sea. If it were not for Xiaoqing, even if she returned to Japan, she would struggle on the edge of death. She would never be able to live such a life. People should be grateful. Ito Kumiko was very satisfied. Let's go back. Before boarding the ship, Xiaoqing turned her head and waved at Ito Kumiko. She said to Abe Shizuku, I hope you can tell Mochizuki Shiranui. Forget it, that's it. She boarded the ship and waved her hand again, bidding farewell to the entire Japan. This country indeed gave her a very bad impression, but one thing could not be concealed. There were also some people who left a deep impression on her. For example, Abe Shizuku, Ito Kumiko, and Mochizuki Shiranui. Abe Shizuku gathered his sleeves and stood for a long time. When the ship became a small black dot, he said, She came, why didn't she appear? Don't you want to say goodbye to her? Mochizuki Shiranui slowly walked out of the darkness. His eyes were red, but there were no tears. Because the tears had already flowed out last night. There's nothing to say. Mochizuki Shiranui's voice was a little hoarse. He stood there for a long time, looking at the direction where Xiaoqing and the others left. Finally, he lowered his head and slowly walked back. He had been abandoned by his master. Although Xiaoqing had never admitted to being his master. In Full Moon Whitewater's life, which was full of twists and turns, but was completely under his control, Xiaoqing was like an accident that couldn't be controlled. She ruthlessly barged in and disrupted his orderly life. She forcefully pulled his heart out of his chest, but refused to take it away and threw it back at his feet. After finishing everything, he clapped his hands and left. Full Moon of Whitewater felt that he hated Xiaoqing, hated her heartlessness. But Full Moon of Whitewater knew that as long as Xiaoqing nodded, he would be willing to leave everything behind. He would leave behind the glory and wealth at his fingertips and follow her, even if it was only as a slave. Sometimes, he despised his own inferiority, but he couldn't help but wonder how cruel that heartless woman was to not even give him a little bit of hope. After walking for a long time, Moongazer Whitewater stopped. He turned around and asked Mikiko Ito, how about we make a deal? Mikiko Ito looked at Moongazer Whitewater doubtfully. The pale and stubborn youth curved his lips and then said, be my imperial concubine, in name. Probably in the whole country, besides Abe and Shizuka, only Mikiko Ito would remember her. It didn't matter. He would treasure all the memories of her. All of them. As for what Xiaoqing wanted, he would do it. He would make the whole country orderly. Because this was what Xiaoqing wanted to see. Xiaoqing didn't know that there was a youth who was so desperate and helpless because of her departure. Even if she knew, she would only say that it was better to have a short pain than a long pain. Xiaoqing was a very strange person. She could be very gentle to the people she loved. It could be said that she was as gentle as water. But to the people she didn't love, she was ruthless to a terrible extent. Chapter 478. The former was represented by Air Dai and Yen Chiua, while the latter was represented by Full Moon of Whitewater. No wonder someone asked her if she had a heart. Yes, she gave it to someone she cared about. As for who the person who asked her was. Oh, she forgot. The person who would forget was definitely an unimportant person. The journey back was much smoother than when they came. Moreover, they had a boat, so they didn't need to care about the direction at all. They just needed to wait. Therefore, Xiaoqing's life became eating, sleeping, and talking about Yen Chiue. After all, she was bored. Then, while she was bored, she actually broke through. Originally, when she was destroying the base of the androids, she felt that she was about to break through. At that time, she was already on the verge of breaking through. However, there was no movement for a long time, so Xiaoqing let nature take its course. Unexpectedly, she broke through to level 6 while she was in a daze. The feeling of level 6 was completely different from the peak of level 5. She even felt that she could face the entire base of androids without a problem. That kind of breakthrough was a kind of suppression of the realm. Just like when she was level 5, she could fight a group of level 4 mutants alone. Now that she was level 6, she could easily fight a group of level 5 mutants alone. People were in high spirits when faced with happy events. Then, there were 2 happy events. After a few days of wandering, they finally returned to the Celestial Empire. The moment she set foot on the land of her own country, her heart was in a mess. Xiaoqing only had one thought now. She wanted to go home. She wanted to go back to see her baby and her friends. When they were about to get off the boat, the helmsman stopped Xiaoqing and handed her a letter. It was said that it was from Full Moon of White Water. Then, the helmsman returned. After watching the boat leave, Xiaoqing wanted to open the letter directly. However, the most important thing now was to send little brother Feng Lan back. She first put the letter into the space and took little brother Feng Lan back to the base where he lived. He even carried a tuna that was longer than a person. This fish was so big that it was probably enough for Feng Lan's whole family to eat for half a month. When the time came, they could directly dry it into salted fish and eat it. Before they got close to the base, Xiaoqing sensed that something was wrong. She smelled the faint scent of blood. Xiaoqing immediately became alert. She made a hand gesture to signal Air Dai and the others to be careful. Then, she slowly approached the base. As soon as they approached, Xiaoqing was shocked. The gate of the base was open, and the gatekeeper was lying in a pool of blood. She quickly led people into the base and saw that the street was in a mess, as if it had just been ransacked. Feng Lan's face was pale. If it wasn't for Xiaoqing supporting him, his legs would have gone weak and he wouldn't be able to stand up. I hear voices. Follow me. Xiaoqing led them to the square. When they got closer, they found that everyone was in the square. A group of people were holding guns, and some were empty-handed. They surrounded the people in the base. The people in the base were holding their heads and squatting on the open ground. There were several corpses in front of them. Xiaoqing hurriedly took her friends to hide. They had to observe the situation first before making a decision and taking the next step. Someone was counting. After that, he said to a man who looked like a leader, "There are 123 people in total. There are not many women, only 44. Boss, what should we do?" The leader waved his hand and said, "Keep the women, kill the men. Also, pay attention to the good-looking men. The old ones are a waste of food. Kill them all." The man who was counting immediately asked, "What about the children?" Chapter 479. Children can't be played with. Fortunately, their meat is tender. It's like cooking them after they die, someone immediately said with a sinister smile. Third brother is right. Let's kill all the men first. Since this place is near the sea, we don't lack salt. We can make them into jerky and store them. We won't have to worry about food for a while. The leader touched his chin and said. Feng Lan immediately saw Feng Yu, who was protecting a few children. He was anxious. If Xiaoqing hadn't held him back, he would have already rushed out. Don't be impulsive, Xiaoqing said calmly. Leave it to me. Feng Lan clenched his fists tightly and nodded. Xiaoqing looked at the direction of the wind and scattered the daughter seeds first. She was afraid that when a fight broke out, some people would go crazy and kill ordinary people first. They had to guard against this. After all, Feng Lan's elder sister, Feng Yu, and his younger brothers and sisters were in the crowd. The leader was about to give the order when he suddenly smelled a faint fragrance. He turned around and saw his subordinates looking up in shock. Their jaws were about to fall off as they looked behind him. The leader followed his gaze and saw a big tree appear out of thin air behind him. It was still growing slowly. The huge crown of the tree covered the sky and stretched its branches wantonly. Bits of light fell down and landed on the tip of his nose. It was a little itchy. What was this? Just when the leader was a little confused, he suddenly heard a scream. Warm blood splashed on his face, and the leader was so scared that he subconsciously activated his ability. He saw that vines had drilled out from under the tree and dragged one of his men under the tree. After his subordinate was dragged under the tree, he was directly dismembered by many vines. The pieces of his corpse were dragged under the tree by the vines and turned into nutrients. The tree's roots quickly drilled out from the ground and pierced into the nutrients, absorbing the rich nutrients. The leader didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the branches and leaves of this tree were more luxuriant. The branches and leaves moved without wind, and the rustling sound seemed to be expressing its joy. While he was still in shock, more and more people were dragged under the tree and turned into nourishment for the tree. He wanted to shout for the enemy to attack and get everyone to prepare for battle, but no sound came out of his mouth. His throat was blocked by something. The last thing his subordinates saw was the leader opening his mouth, and green leaves and sprouts were scrambling to crawl out of his throat. Then, there was no then. Shao Qing clapped her hands and stood out from the dark. Except for a man who had already peed in his pants, everyone else had already become Light's nourishment. The man was really scared to the point of peeing. The yellow liquid flowed down his crotch and dripped to the ground. His hand was still holding the gun, but the gun in his hand had already fallen to the ground with the yellow liquid. Shao Qing flung out her vines and dragged him over. Then, she hung him a little distance away from her in disgust. She was going to ask him about it after cleaning up the scene. As soon as the battle was over, Feng Lan was the first to rush into the crowd and hug Feng Yu. Sister, are you okay? Feng Yu was really scared to death. She turned around and hugged Feng Lan, crying bitterly. As soon as she cried, the children cried as well. The whole square was filled with crying. After all, after this group of people had built this small base, they had been living in peace on this coast. There was nothing nearby that was worth fighting over, so it had been very peaceful. They didn't expect that a group of robbers would suddenly come today. They burned, killed, and robbed, and even wanted to turn them into food reserves. If Shao Qing hadn't stopped that group of robbers in time, the women would have been raped, and the men would have become jerky that was about to be pickled. After surviving a disaster, it was really a feeling of not being able to cry out loud. Some people cried because their family members had died. When this group of robbers entered the city, they had resisted stubbornly, and many people had died in the resistance. Feng Lan had seen the world, so she was calmer. After comforting Feng Yu, she began to arrange for people to clean up the scene. Shao Qing was still carrying the tuna on her shoulder. She asked kindly, "Who are you? Why did you come here? What do you want to do?" The man was trembling. Let alone talking, his whole body was shaking like he had Parkinson's disease. Shao Qing said patiently, "I'll give you 3 seconds to calm down, and then tell me what you need to say. Of course, you can refuse, but I don't think you want to experience the consequences." The man trembled and quickly shouted, "We are robbers. A zombie tide broke out inland, and everywhere is chaotic. We have no choice but to come to the coast." Shao Qing's face turned cold. "What happened?" You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.